Hi everyone, we are Nightmare Narratives and we are here to help you today. I know you will use this video to fall asleep before, so like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. My friend vanished a month ago, leaving behind a trail of questions that gnaw at my sanity. He had been living with his parents, suffocating under the weight of unfulfilled ambitions and the shadow of his grandfather's passing. Inheriting an old film projector, he believed it might ignite the spark needed to overcome his creative paralysis. Our last conversation haunts me. He was eager, almost desperate, to explore whatever secrets those ancient reels held. He mentioned he planned to watch them that night, hoping they might inspire his dormant imagination. According to the scattered notes his parents found tucked under his bed, he fell asleep during one of the films. But when he awoke, he wasn't in his room. He was somewhere else entirely. I've taken it upon myself to piece together his final thoughts, transcribing his cryptic journal in hopes of understanding what happened. The following is the first part of his account. If anyone has experienced anything like this or can offer any insight, please reach out. I haven't written a single story in over a year. Each day feels like wading through molasses, every thought a struggle against the quicksand of my own mind. Depression has a way of swallowing you whole, turning your own imagination into a hostile landscape. Ideas flicker and die like moths drawn too close to the flame. Tonight, I sit here forcing myself to write these words, hoping to break the dam that's been holding back the flood of my creativity. Maybe if I spill my thoughts onto the page, no matter how fragmented or raw, I can find a thread to follow. Horror has always intrigued me, the way it peels back the facade of reality to reveal the chaos underneath. Perhaps that's where I need to dive. My grandfather's old projector arrived today, a relic from another time. It's a beautiful piece of machinery, all polished wood and brass, intricate engravings winding around its frame like serpents. There's something almost hypnotic about it, a silent promise whispered from the past. I remember the summer spent with him, tinkering with gadgets and absorbing his endless well of knowledge. This projector feels like a final gift, a bridge between his world and mine. It came with several film reels, none labeled. Curiosity gnaws at me. What did he capture? What secrets did he lock away in these frames? Setting it up in my room, I draw the curtains and let the darkness settle. The first reel sputters to life, casting a dim glow that seems to pulse in time with my heartbeat. The images are obscure, shadowy figures moving through a landscape I can't quite place. The film quality is degraded, scratches and imperfections creating a tapestry of decay. An empty street appears, lined with buildings that lean at impossible angles. Windows stare back like vacant eyes. A figure stands at the far end, its form blurred and indistinct. As the camera moves closer, the figure doesn't come into focus. Instead, it seems to fragment, splitting into multiple silhouettes that scatter in different directions. A low hum starts to emanate from the projector, a sound that resonates deep within my bones. My eyelids grow heavy, the boundaries between the room and the images beginning to blur. Sleep pulls me under. When I open my eyes, the air is thick with fog. I'm no longer in my room. Cold cobblestones stretch out beneath my feet, slick with some unidentifiable substance. The sky above is a swirling mass of dark clouds, churning like a living thing. Panic surges through me, but it's muffled, distant, as if filtered through a layer of glass. I begin to walk, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence. The buildings around me are towering monoliths of stone and metal, their surfaces etched with symbols that seem to writhe and shift when I look directly at them. Doors and windows are absent, leaving only solid walls that offer no refuge. Turning a corner, I find myself facing an endless corridor lined with mirrors. Each reflection shows a different version of me, some distorted, others eerily accurate, but with subtle, unsettling differences. One by one, they begin to turn away, disappearing into the darkness beyond their glass confines. A sound breaks the silence, a low, guttural whisper that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. Words in a language I can't comprehend echo around me, growing louder and more insistent. The corridor stretches and twists, the floor tilting beneath me. I run, but the path ahead only elongates, the exit forever out of reach. The whispers coalesce into a scream. I jolt awake, back in my room. The projector is still humming, the reel spinning aimlessly. My heart pounds against my ribcage like a caged animal. Was it a dream? It felt too real, too visceral. Shaking off the lingering dread, I decide to try another reel. Perhaps this one will be different. The new film begins with a serene scene, a dense forest bathed in the golden light of sunset. The camera weaves through the trees, branches clawing at the lens like skeletal fingers. There's a path leading deeper into the woods, and as it progresses, the light begins to fade. Shadows stretch and merge until darkness envelopes everything. The screen goes black. Then, faintly at first, glowing symbols emerge, hanging in the air like embers from a dying fire. They pulse rhythmically, drawing me in. Without warning, the symbols burst into flames, and the forest is ablaze. The heat is tangible. I can feel it searing my skin. Smoke fills my lungs, and I gasp for breath. I stumble backward and realize I'm no longer watching the film. I'm inside it. The flames consume the trees, reducing them to ash that swirls into the sky, forming a vortex. From within the maelstrom, something emerges, a towering figure draped in shadows, its eyes two piercing points of light. It raises a hand, and the ground beneath me cracks open. I fall into the abyss. I awaken again, but this time I'm not in my room. I'm lying on a cold, metallic surface. The room is vast and empty, the walls covered in the same shifting symbols from the forest. A door stands at the far end, a massive, imposing slab of iron with no handle. Compelled by some unseen force, I approach it. As I draw near, the symbols on the door rearrange themselves, forming words in a language I suddenly understand. Knowledge for freedom. A voice echoes in my mind. Right? A desk materializes beside me, an ancient typewriter resting upon it. Pages flutter to the floor, blank and endless. I sit, my fingers moving of their own accord. Words spill forth, stories, memories, fears, all pouring out in a torrent. With each page I fill, a chain around my ankle becomes visible, its links stretching into the darkness. The more I write, the heavier it becomes, pulling me down. Panic grips me, but I can't stop. The compulsion to continue is overwhelming. Knowledge for freedom, the voice repeats. Realization dawns. This isn't a request, it's a demand. The entity, whatever it is, feeds on stories, on the essence of creativity. It's consuming me, summoning every ounce of willpower. I wrench myself away from the desk. The typewriter protests, keys clacking furiously on their own. Pages spewing out blank except for the word "write" scrawled over and over. I run towards the door, the chain dragging behind me. It grows taut, jerking me to a halt. Despair threatens to engulf me, but I notice a fragment of broken metal on the floor, a shard from the typewriter. Grasping it, I hack at the chain. Sparks fly, and with a final strike, it shatters. The door swings open. Beyond is a void, a vast expanse of nothingness. But amidst the emptiness, there's a faint glow. A figure stands silhouetted against the light, hand outstretched. I hesitate. The voice returns, now a cacophony of whispers. Stay, create, become eternal. The figure beckons, and I know that stepping through the door is my only chance. I leap into the void. I land on soft grass. The night sky stretches above me, stars twinkling like shards of glass. Relief washes over me until I realize I'm in the old park where I used to play as a child. But something's off. The swings sway with no breeze. The merry-go-round spins slowly on its own. Laughter echoes, disembodied and distant. A child's voice whispers, "Come play with us." Shadows gather at the edges of the playground, forming into the shapes of children. Their eyes are hollow, mouths stretched into unnatural smiles. They surround me, hands reaching out. I back away, heart pounding. You're not real. They tilt their heads in unison. But we are. We've always been here, waiting. The ground beneath me begins to ripple like water. I try to run, but my feet sink into the earth. The shadow children advance, their laughter turning to screams. Just as they reach me, everything stops. Silence. Darkness. I open my eyes to find myself back in my room, the morning light filtering through the curtains. The projector sits idle, the reels neatly stacked beside it. Was it all a nightmare? A weight presses in my pocket. I reach in and pull out the shard of metal, the fragment from the typewriter. A chill runs down my spine. The doorbell rings. I hear my mother's voice calling me downstairs. Dazed, I make my way to the kitchen. "There's someone here to see you," she says, her face pale. A man stands in the doorway, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his eyes obscured by the shadow of his hat. "Can I help you?" I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiles, and I see the reflection of the swirling symbols in his eyes. "We've been expecting you," he says. "It's time to finish what you started." Behind him, the world begins to dissolve, the walls peeling away to reveal the void once more. I try to turn, to run, but the floor liquefies beneath me. Hands made of shadow grasp my ankles, pulling me down. Knowledge for freedom. The man's voice echoes as everything fades. That's where his notes end. I've searched his room, the house, the entire neighborhood. There's no sign of him anywhere. The police have been no help. They think he just ran off. But last night, I found the old projector set up in my garage, a single reel loaded and ready. I swear I heard it humming softly, even though it wasn't plugged in. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to destroy it, to burn it and scatter the ashes. But another part, a darker, curious part, wonders what secrets it holds. Maybe it's a portal, a gateway to wherever he is. Maybe I can save him. The projector sits there, silent now, waiting. Should I press play? If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. In the heart of a bustling city stood an old, forgotten library, wedged between towering skyscrapers like a relic of a bygone era. The library was an architectural marvel, with ornate carvings and stained glass windows that cast kaleidoscopic patterns on the cobblestone streets below. Despite its beauty, it was largely ignored, overshadowed by the modernity that surrounded it. Emma was a young journalist, always on the hunt for unique stories that others overlooked. Intrigued by the library's anachronistic presence, she decided to explore it for an article she was writing about hidden gems in the city. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, she was greeted by the scent of aged paper and polished wood. Inside, the library was a labyrinth of towering bookshelves that seemed to stretch infinitely upward. The atmosphere was serene, a sanctuary from the cacophony of the city outside. An elderly librarian sat behind a massive oak desk, her silver hair pulled back into a tight bun, eyes sharp behind thin-rimmed glasses. "Welcome," the librarian said with a warm smile. "Feel free to explore. We have books that cater to every curiosity." Emma thanked her and wandered deeper into the maze of literature. She marveled at the vast collection, ancient tomes with gilded edges, scrolls sealed with wax, and leather-bound volumes whose titles had long faded. As she turned a corner, she stumbled upon a small alcove she hadn't noticed before. In the center of the alcove stood a pedestal, and upon it lay a book unlike any she'd ever seen. The cover was made of dark, weathered leather, etched with intricate symbols that seemed to shift when not looked at directly. Gold clasps held it shut, and there was no title to hint at its contents. Compelled by an inexplicable urge, Emma reached out and touched the book. The clasps clicked open, and the book fell ajar. The pages were blank. Disappointed yet intrigued, she decided to take it to the librarian. "Excuse me," Emma called out as she approached the desk, but the librarian was nowhere to be seen. In her place was a small note. "Back shortly. Please make yourself at home." Feeling a bit unnerved, Emma returned to the alcove, the mysterious book still in hand. She sat down on a plush armchair nearby and opened the book once more. This time, words began to appear on the pages, forming sentences in elegant script. Asterisk welcome, seeker of stories. What tale do you desire? Asterisk. Startled, Emma glanced around to see if someone was playing a prank on her. Seeing no one, she looked back at the book. The words had vanished, replaced by a blank page once more. Curiosity overrode caution. I wish to know the secrets this library holds, she whispered. The pages fluttered of their own accord, stopping midway through the book. New words formed. Asterisk, to uncover secrets. One must be willing to pay the price. Do you consent? Asterisk. Emma hesitated. The air around her seemed to thicken, the shadows deepening. Her heart pounded, but the lure of a groundbreaking story was too strong. Yes, I consent. A sudden gust of wind swept through the alcove, though no windows were open. The symbols on the book's cover glowed faintly, and the room around her began to change. The walls expanded, the shelves stretching higher until they disappeared into darkness. The cozy warmth of the library was replaced by a cold, oppressive atmosphere. She stood up, clutching the book tightly. Hello? Is anyone there? Silence. Taking a cautious step forward, Emma realized the floor was no longer the polished wood of the library, but an uneven, stone surface. Torches flickered to life along the walls, casting a dim light that did little to penetrate the shadows. Where am I? She whispered. You are where all stories begin and end, a voice echoed around her. It was neither male nor female, but something ancient and distant. She turned in circles, trying to locate the source. This isn't funny. I want to go back. Asterisk. There is no going back without completing the story. Asterisk. The book in her hands felt heavier. Looking down, she saw that the pages were now filled with text and illustrations depicting a labyrinth. At the bottom of the page, a single instruction read, Asterisk, find the center to find yourself. Asterisk. Realizing she had no other option, Emma began to walk. The corridors of the labyrinth were lined with towering shelves filled with books, each one whispering faintly as she passed. Some voices were tempting, others mournful, but all were distracting. She reached a fork in the path. To the left, the corridor was bathed in a soft, golden light. To the right, it descended into darkness. Recalling every myth she'd ever read, she chose the path of light. As she walked, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Emma, come read my tale. A voice beckoned from a book jutting out of a shelf. Against her better judgment, she pulled the book free. The cover bore her name. Opening it, she saw scenes from her own life. Her childhood, her first day of school, the moment she decided to become a journalist. Flipping further, she reached a page that was blank except for a single illustration. Herself, standing in a labyrinth, holding the book. A chill ran down her spine. She snapped the book shut and shoved it back onto the shelf. This isn't real, she told herself. But it is, the disembodied voice replied. She quickened her pace, determined to reach the center and escape this nightmare. The path began to slope downward, the golden light fading into a muted gray. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned to hushed warnings. Asterisk, turn back. It's not safe. Asterisk. Asterisk, he waits below. Asterisk. Asterisk, the story eater comes. Asterisk. Emma tried to block out the voices, but they pressed into her mind, each one more urgent than the last. Suddenly, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. In the center stood a massive, ancient tree whose branches stretched upward into oblivion. Hanging from its limbs were countless books, their pages fluttering like leaves despite the still air. At the base of the tree sat a figure cloaked in shadows. Though she couldn't see his face, she felt his eyes upon her. Are you the one trapping me here? She demanded, mustering her courage. I am merely the guardian, he replied, his voice echoing as if from a deep well. Asterisk, you chose to enter. Only you can choose to leave. Asterisk, how? Tell me. He extended a skeletal hand, pointing to the book she still held. Asterisk, finish the story. Asterisk. She looked down at the book. The pages were blank again. I don't understand. Asterisk. Write your ending, Emma. Every story must have an end. Asterisk. Frustration and fear boiled over. And what if I don't? Will I be trapped here forever? Asterisk, perhaps. Or perhaps you'll become part of another story. Asterisk. Realizing she had no other choice, she sat at the base of the tree, the roots twisting around her like serpents. Taking the pen that had mysteriously appeared in her pocket, she touched it to the page. At first, no words came. Then, slowly, She began to write about a brave journalist who outsmarted an ancient entity, escaping his labyrinth and returning to the world to tell her tale. As she wrote, the chamber began to tremble. The hanging books rustled violently, and the shadows deepened. The guardian rose. Asterisk, you think it's so simple? Asterisk, his voice was darker now, laced with menace. Emma continued writing, ignoring him. The more she wrote, the more the world around her began to dissolve, the labyrinth collapsing in on itself. Asterisk, enough! Asterisk, the guardian roared. He moved toward her, but the ground split between them, a chasm opening that swallowed the roots of the tree. With a final word, Emma wrote, the end. Everything went black. She gasped, sucking in air as if she'd been drowning. Blinking rapidly, she found herself back in the alcove of the library. The mysterious book closed on her lap. The normal sounds of the library surrounded her. The distant hum of city traffic, the rustle of pages, the soft footsteps of patrons browsing the shelves. The elderly librarian stood before her, eyes sharp but kind. Did you find what you were looking for? Emma nodded slowly. I think so. The librarian extended her hand. May I? She gestured to the book. Emma hesitated before handing it over. What is this place? A refuge for stories and those who seek them, the librarian replied. But some stories are not meant to be found. Emma stood, her legs shaky. I should go. The librarian smiled gently. Remember, not all who wander are lost, but some who delve too deep may never return. Taking one last look at the library's vast interior, Emma hurried toward the exit. As she pushed open the heavy doors, she glanced back. The library seemed darker, the shadows longer. The librarian was gone. Outside, the city bustled as if nothing had happened. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. Emma took a deep breath, savoring the crisp air. Reaching into her bag for her notebook, she froze. The mysterious book was there, its dark leather cover unmistakable. Attached was a note in elegant script. Asterisk, for when you're ready to continue the story. Asterisk. A chill ran through her, but alongside it was a spark of intrigue. Clutching the book tightly, she made her way home. That night, she sat at her desk, the book before her. Unable to resist, she opened it. The pages were no longer blank. Instead, they held a single sentence. Asterisk, stories never truly end. They live on in those who tell them. Asterisk. She smiled, a mix of fear and fascination coursing through her. Picking up her pen, she began to write, not out of compulsion, but out of choice. As she penned the first words, a shadow moved in the corner of her eye. She paused, looking up but saw nothing. Shaking off the unease, she continued. Hours passed unnoticed. It wasn't until the candle on her desk sputtered out that she realized how late it was. Stretching, she closed the book and prepared for bed. As she slept, dreams swirled, labyrinths, ancient trees, shadowy figures. And through it all, the librarian's voice echoed. Asterisk, be careful which stories you enter, for some may never let you go. Asterisk, morning light filtered through the curtains, waking her. Rubbing her eyes, she sat up and gasped. Her room was filled with bookshelves that hadn't been there before, each shelf crammed with volumes of all shapes and sizes. Heart pounding, she jumped out of bed. The door to her room was gone, replaced by an endless corridor lined with even more shelves. On the floor by her bed lay the mysterious book, open to a new page. In her own handwriting were the words, asterisk, and so, the storyteller became part of the story, forever wandering the labyrinth of tales untold. Asterisk, Emma screamed, the sound swallowed by the silence of the endless library. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Emma wandered the infinite corridors, each turn leading to more questions and no answers. She read countless books, each one a fragment of lives she'd never know, stories without endings. One day, she came upon a familiar alcove. In the center stood a pedestal with a dark, leather-bound book. Hope and dread filled her. Approaching cautiously, she opened the book. The pages were blank except for a single line. Asterisk, to escape, another must take your place. Asterisk, footsteps echoed behind her. Turning, she saw a young man, eyes wide with awe and fear, entering the alcove. "Hello," he called out. "Is anyone here?" Emma looked back at the book, understanding dawning upon her. The cycle continued. Stepping into the shadows, she watched as he reached for the book. As he opened it, their eyes met. She offered a sad smile. "Welcome." The library claimed another. In the bustling city, the old library remains, unnoticed by most, but irresistible to the curious few. A sanctuary of stories, a trap for the unwary, it stands as a reminder. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. It was 2:45 a.m. when the first message lit up my phone screen, casting a pale glow across my dark bedroom. I groggily reached over to see who could be texting me at this hour. The number was unfamiliar. "Are you awake?" Figuring it was a wrong number, I decided not to respond. I placed the phone back on the nightstand and rolled over, eager to return to sleep. Moments later, another buzz. "I know you're awake." A chill prickled the back of my neck. Maybe a friend playing a late-night prank? I typed back, "Who is this?" The reply was almost instantaneous. "You shouldn't leave your window open." I sat up abruptly, my eyes darting to the window across the room. The curtains were drawn, but I distinctly remembered closing and locking it before bed. My fingers trembled as I typed, "This isn't funny. Tell me who you are." Silence. No response this time. I got out of bed slowly, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the quiet night. Gathering my courage, I approached the window. With a swift motion, I pulled the curtain aside. The window was closed, just as I had left it. I let out a shaky sigh, feeling a bit foolish. It was just a prankster trying to get under my skin. As I turned away, my phone buzzed again. "Nice posters. I had those when I was your age." My heart pounded against my ribcage. I glanced around the room at the band posters plastered on my walls. This is getting too close for comfort. I dialed the number, but it went straight to voicemail, a generic automated message. I texted back, "I'm calling the police." 3 dots appeared, indicating the person was typing. Then the message came through. "They can't help you." Enough was enough. I grabbed my phone and headed toward the bedroom door. As I reached for the handle, another message arrived. "Going somewhere." I froze. The hallway light seeped under the door, but the silence on the other side was heavy, oppressive. I felt trapped. My hands were slick with sweat as I typed, "What do you want?" This time a photo came through. It was a picture of my hallway, taken from just outside my bedroom door. The image was dark and grainy, but there was no mistaking it. My breath hitched. Someone was in my house. Summoning all the courage I could muster, I decided to confront whoever it was. I swung the door open, ready to scream or fight or both. The hallway was empty. I flipped on the lights, illuminating the space from end to end. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked every room, every closet, under every bed. No one. Returning to my bedroom, I locked the door and dialed 911. My fingers felt numb as I pressed the buttons. The call wouldn't go through, just static on the other end. A new message appeared. "They won't answer." I threw the phone onto the bed. This had to be a nightmare. Maybe I was still asleep. I slapped myself lightly, hoping to jolt awake. The sting was all too real. The phone buzzed again. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. Look outside. Part of me didn't want to obey, but curiosity or perhaps fear compelled me. I walked back to the window and hesitantly parted the curtains. At first, I saw nothing unusual. The quiet street, the parked cars, the streetlights casting their amber glow. Then I noticed it. Across the street, under the flickering street lamp, stood a figure. It was tall and thin, draped in what looked like a long coat. The hat obscured the face, casting a shadow where features should be. Even from a distance, I could feel the figure's gaze piercing through me. The phone vibrated in my hand. "I see you." The figure raised a gloved hand and waved slowly. My mouth went dry. I dropped the curtain and stumbled backward. This couldn't be happening. Another message. "Let me in." I typed back frantically, "Leave me alone." "That's not very polite," came the reply. Suddenly, loud knocks echoed from my front door downstairs. The sound reverberated through the quiet house, each knock more insistent than the last. I retreated to the far corner of my room, sliding down to the floor. I dialed my parents' number. They were out of town for the weekend. Straight to voicemail. The knocking stopped. Maybe he's gone, I thought desperately. Maybe this is just some elaborate joke. Then, creaking footsteps sounded on the stairs. Someone was inside the house. I held my breath, every muscle tensed. The footsteps grew louder, closer. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. Silence. The doorknob rattled gently. "I know you're in there," a muffled voice whispered. I looked around for something, anything to defend myself with. My eyes landed on a heavy lamp on the bedside table. I grabbed it, holding it like a weapon. The phone buzzed. A new message, a video file. Against all logic, I opened it. The shaky footage showed someone walking down a hallway, my hallway. It was live. The camera panned to the bedroom door, my door. A gloved hand reached out, grasping the doorknob. I heard the gentle click as the lock turned, but I had locked it, hadn't I? The door began to open slowly. I screamed, "Get away from me!" The door swung open to reveal nothing. The hallway was empty. I stood there, lamp raised, my breaths ragged. Tears blurred my vision. The phone buzzed again. "Behind you." I spun around. The room was empty, but the shadows seemed deeper, darker. The closet door was ajar, though I was certain it had been closed earlier. A low chuckle emanated from within. I backed away, edging toward the open bedroom door. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. The closet door creaked open wider, and a figure stepped out, the same one from the street, tall and obscured by shadows. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to choke out. The figure tilted its head. "Because you invited me in? I did no such thing." It pointed to the phone in my trembling hand. "You opened the messages. You looked when I told you not to." I realized with dawning horror that each interaction, each response, had been an invitation, drawing this entity closer. I bolted from the room, racing down the stairs. The house warped around me. Corridors stretched impossibly. Doors led to unfamiliar rooms. I was trapped in a maze that shouldn't exist. "There's no escape," the voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. I burst into the living room, only to find the front door replaced by a solid wall. Windows that once overlooked the street now revealed endless darkness. My phone buzzed incessantly, messages flooding in. "Behind you, behind you, behind you." I refused to look, clenching my eyes shut. A cold breath brushed against my neck. "Look at me," the voice hissed. I shook my head violently. "Leave me alone. Look at me," it insisted more forcefully. I felt icy fingers graze my shoulder. Mustering every ounce of willpower, I screamed and spun around, swinging the lamp wildly. There was nothing there. I sank to the floor, sobbing. The phone buzzed one final time. "You can't hide from me." The screen went black, the device dead. Silence enveloped the room. The oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, but the fear remained. I stayed curled up on the floor until the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds. When I finally dared to move, everything seemed normal. The house was as it should be. The front door was back. The windows showed the familiar street. Was it over? Exhausted, I decided to step outside, needing to feel the morning air, to reassure myself of reality. As I opened the door, a small package lay on the doorstep. There was no address, no markings, just a neatly wrapped box tied with a black ribbon. Against my better judgment, I picked it up and unwrapped it. Inside was a single item, an old-fashioned pocket watch, its hands frozen at 2:45. Attached was a note. "Time's up." The watch began to tick, the hands moving backward. The world around me started to fade, colors bleeding away into shades of gray. The street emptied, cars and people vanishing as if they were never there. I stumbled back inside, but the house was no longer mine. The walls were decaying, wallpaper peeling to reveal rotting wood. Shadows moved independently of any light source, writhing along the floors and ceilings. The voice echoed once more. "Welcome to my world." I realized then that escape was impossible. The entity had drawn me into its realm, a place where reality was malleable, and fear was the only constant. Now, I wander these endless halls, haunted by whispers and shadows. My phone lies discarded, useless in this place. Sometimes I hear the distant buzz of a message received, but I no longer check. I know there's no point. I am not alone here. Others have fallen into the same trap, drawn by curiosity, ensnared by their own interactions. I see their silhouettes sometimes flickering at the edge of my vision. If you ever receive a message from an unknown number, a message that sends a chill down your spine, do not respond. Do not engage. Ignore it. Delete it. Throw your phone away if you must. Because once you let it in, there's no going back. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Lily had always been curious about the old house at the end of Willow Lane. It stood apart from the other homes, its Victorian architecture a stark contrast to the modern suburban design surrounding it. When her family moved in, she was thrilled by the possibilities of secret rooms and hidden passages. On the first night, as boxes remained unpacked and furniture was yet to find its place, Lily lay in bed staring at the ornate patterns on the ceiling. The house creaked and settled, typical sounds for a structure its age, but then she heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from above. Probably just a tree branch, she thought, pulling the covers tighter. The next day, she explored the house, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. In the attic, she found a small door, no taller than 3 feet, tucked behind old trunks and dusty paintings. It was locked, but a sense of unease kept her from trying to open it. That night, the tapping returned, more insistent. It was followed by a faint whisper, indistinct but unmistakably human. Lily sat up, straining to hear. The whispering ceased, replaced by a scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. She decided to tell her parents. "It's an old house," her mother said dismissively. "Old houses make strange noises." "But it sounds like someone's up there," Lily insisted. Her father sighed. "We'll check it out tomorrow." The following day, her parents searched the attic, but found nothing unusual. "See, there's nothing to worry about," her father assured her. But Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That evening, she approached the small door. This time, she noticed something she hadn't before, a child's handprint smudged on the frame. Summoning her courage, she tried the door again. It creaked open easily, revealing a narrow passage that led deeper into darkness. The air was colder here, and it smelled of damp earth. "Lily," a voice whispered from within. It was the voice of a child. She stumbled back, heart racing. "Who's there?" "Come play with me," the voice beckoned. She fled the attic, slamming the door behind her. She told her parents what had happened, but they dismissed it as her imagination. That night, the tapping became pounding. The whispers turned to cries. "Let me out," the voice wailed. Lily covered her ears, tears streaming down her face. The noises grew louder, more desperate. In the morning, her parents were concerned. "Maybe we should have someone look at the house," her mother conceded. A local historian was called in. Mr. Thompson was an elderly man who had lived in the town his whole life. As he walked through the house, his expression grew grim. "This house has a history," he began. "A family lived here over a century ago. Their youngest daughter, Emily, disappeared. They say she was playing hide and seek and was never found." "That's just a story," Lily's father scoffed. Mr. Thompson shook his head. "Some say her spirit never left." Determined to put the matter to rest, Lily decided to confront whatever was in the attic. Armed with a flashlight and a resolve she didn't quite feel, she returned to the small door. "Emily," she called into the darkness. Silence. "I'm sorry you're alone. Do you want to play?" A cold breeze brushed past her, and the flashlight flickered. When the light steadied, she saw a figure at the end of the passage, a little girl in a tattered dress, her eyes wide and hollow. "Will you help me find my way home?" Emily asked, her voice echoing. Lily swallowed hard. "How can I help?" "Take my hand." Lily hesitated but extended her hand. Emily's touch was icy, sending a chill through her entire body. Suddenly, the floor gave way beneath them. Lily found herself falling into darkness, the world spinning around her. She landed in a small, enclosed space. Panic surged as she realized she was inside a wooden box, a coffin. She screamed, pounding on the lid. Let me out. From above, Emily's voice whispered, "Now you know how it feels." Desperate, Lily pushed with all her strength. The lid creaked open, and she clawed her way out, gasping for air. She was no longer in the attic, but in a clearing in the woods behind the house. Dazed, she stumbled back home, bursting through the front door. "Mom, Dad." The house was empty. Everything was covered in dust and cobwebs, as if abandoned for years. Family photos hung crooked on the walls. The images faded. A newspaper lay on the table. The headline read, "Local girl missing for 10 years." The photo was of her. "That can't be," she whispered. "I've only been gone a few minutes." "Time is different here," Emily's voice echoed. Lily ran to a mirror. Her reflection showed an older version of herself, gaunt and weary. Tears welled in her eyes as reality sank in. "You're trapped," Emily said, appearing behind her in the mirror. "Just like me. Why are you doing this?" Lily sobbed. "Because misery loves company," Emily replied, a sad smile on her lips. Lily sank to the floor, despair overwhelming her. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. No one came for her. The town moved on, her disappearance becoming another local legend. In the old house at the end of Willow Lane, two figures can sometimes be seen in the attic window. A pair of girls, forever waiting, forever lost. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Ethan boarded the late-night bus heading out of the city, relieved to find it nearly empty. He chose a seat near the back, away from the few other passengers scattered throughout. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic sway of the bus were almost soothing after a long day. As the city lights faded, he gazed out the window at the darkened countryside. Minutes turned into hours, and the monotonous landscape began to blur. Feeling drowsy, Ethan closed his eyes. A sudden jolt woke him. The bus had stopped. Looking around, he noticed that the interior lights were flickering. The other passengers sat unnaturally still, their faces obscured by shadows. "Is everything okay?" he called out to the driver. No response. He stood up and walked down the aisle. "Excuse me?" he repeated. The driver stared straight ahead, hands gripping the wheel tightly. His knuckles were pale, and his eyes seemed fixed on something far in the distance. Ethan felt a chill creep over him. He glanced at the passengers as he moved forward. They remained motionless. Not a single head turned in his direction. "Sir?" He tried once more, reaching out to touch the driver's shoulder. The driver slowly turned his head. His eyes were vacant, pupils dilated. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. A shiver ran down Ethan's spine. "What do you mean?" Before he could get an answer, the bus lurched forward, throwing him off balance. The lights flickered violently before plunging the bus into darkness. Panic set in. He fumbled his way back to his seat, the only source of light now the occasional flash of headlights from passing cars, which he realized were no longer there. Pressing his face to the window, he saw nothing but an impenetrable fog outside. The road, the landscape, everything had vanished. He pulled out his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The battery icon flashed red before the screen went black. A soft humming filled the air, growing louder by the second. It was a melody, haunting and unfamiliar. The passengers began to hum in unison, their voices melding into a disconcerting harmony. Ethan covered his ears. "Stop it," he shouted. They ignored him, the humming intensifying. The sound seemed to penetrate his mind, dredging up memories he'd long forgotten or tried to forget. Scenes from his past flashed before his eyes. Arguments with his estranged brother, the accident that had claimed his parents, the guilt he'd carried for years. "Why are you doing this?" he cried. A young woman seated across the aisle turned her head slowly toward him. Her eyes were entirely black. "It's time to face the truth," she said in a voice that echoed unnaturally. He stumbled backward, tripping over an outstretched leg of another passenger who was now standing, blocking the aisle. One by one, the passengers rose, their empty eyes fixed on him. Heart pounding, Ethan darted toward the rear exit. The door wouldn't budge. Desperate, he slammed his fists against it. "There's nowhere to go," the driver's voice boomed from the front. Spinning around, Ethan saw that the passengers were closing in. Their faces began to change, contorting into familiar visages, his brother, his parents, friends he'd lost touch with, all bearing expressions of disappointment and sorrow. "Stop," he pleaded. "I'm sorry." The figures spoke in unison. "You can't run from yourself." Ethan sank to his knees. "What do you want from me?" "Acceptance," they replied. A heavy silence filled the bus. The figure stood still, watching him. Tears streamed down his face as the weight of his regrets bore down on him. "I'm tired," he whispered. "I don't want to fight anymore." The bus suddenly screeched to a halt. The lights flickered back on, and the humming ceased. Wiping his eyes, Ethan looked around. The passengers were gone. The seats were empty, and the bus was stationary on a quiet road. He stood up cautiously. "Hello." No answer. He approached the driver's seat to find it vacant. The door next to it was open, leading outside. Stepping off the bus, he found himself at a crossroads in the middle of nowhere. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing two paths ahead. A signpost stood between them. One arrow pointed left, labeled truth, and the other pointed right, labeled denial. Behind him, the bus door closed and the vehicle vanished into thin air. He was alone. Ethan took a deep breath, recalling the haunting words, "You can't run from yourself." Resolving to face whatever lay ahead, he chose the path marked truth. As he walked, the surroundings began to change. The barren landscape gave way to a familiar neighborhood, his childhood home. Memories flooded back, both good and bad. He approached the front door, hesitating before turning the knob. Inside, the house was warm and filled with light. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. "Mom? Dad?" he called out. Entering the room, he saw his parents seated at the table, smiling warmly. His brother sat beside them. "Welcome home," his mother said softly. Ethan's eyes welled up. "I'm so sorry for everything." His father stood up, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We've always been here, son. It's time to forgive yourself." His brother nodded. "It's time to move on." A sense of peace washed over him. The weight he'd carried for so long seemed to lift. The room began to fade, the figures becoming translucent. "Wait." Ethan reached out. "Remember what you've learned." His mother's voice echoed as everything dissolved into light. Ethan opened his eyes to find himself seated on a bench at a bus stop in the city. Morning sunlight warmed his face. Commuters bustled around him, the sounds of traffic filling the air. Checking his watch, he realized it was the next day. Had it all been a dream? He felt something in his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Unfolding it, he read, "The journey continues when you are ready." Looking up, he saw his bus approaching. This time, he stood up with a newfound sense of purpose. As he boarded, the driver gave him a friendly nod. Ethan took a seat by the window, watching the world outside with clearer eyes. The past was a part of him, but it no longer defined him. He was ready to face the future. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Isabella had always been fascinated by art. As an aspiring painter, she spent her days studying techniques and her nights practicing them. When she inherited her grandmother's old countryside manor, she saw it as an opportunity to find inspiration away from the city's distractions. The manor was a grand, albeit dilapidated, estate surrounded by overgrown gardens and ancient oak trees. Inside, dust-covered furniture and cobwebs adorned the rooms, remnants of a bygone era. Isabella decided to restore the house gradually, starting with the main living areas. One afternoon, while exploring the manor, she discovered a door hidden behind a heavy tapestry in the hallway. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. Curiosity piqued. She grabbed a lantern and descended the stairs. The cellar was vast, far larger than the house's foundation would suggest. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of earth and old wood. As she moved the lantern's light across the room, she noticed something covered by a tattered sheet against the far wall. Approaching cautiously, she pulled the sheet away to reveal a large, ornate mirror framed in dark mahogany carved with intricate patterns. But as she looked into the mirror, her reflection seemed off. Her face appeared slightly distorted, her eyes a shade darker. A sudden chill ran through her. Shaking it off as a trick of the poor lighting, she continued to explore. Behind the mirror was another object draped in cloth. She unveiled it to find a portrait of a woman who looked strikingly like herself but dressed in Victorian attire. The woman's eyes seemed to follow her, a subtle smirk playing on her lips. At the bottom of the frame was a brass plaque that read, Amara, 1876. Isabella felt an odd connection to the painting, a sense of familiarity she couldn't explain. Deciding it would be a beautiful addition to the main hall, she carried the portrait upstairs. That night, as rain battered the windows and thunder echoed in the distance, Isabella sat by the fireplace, examining the portrait. The resemblance was uncanny. The same wavy dark hair, high cheekbones, and piercing green eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered. A crack of thunder startled her, and the lights flickered. She decided it was time for bed. Placing the portrait on the mantel, she headed upstairs. Sleep did not come easily. Her dreams were vivid and unsettling. Images of the woman in the portrait wandering the halls, whispers in the dark, and flashes of a life that wasn't hers. She awoke in a cold sweat. The old grandfather clock in the hallway struck 3 times. Needing a glass of water, she ventured downstairs. As she passed the mantel, she noticed the portrait was missing. Panic set in. She searched the room, her heart pounding. A faint sound caught her attention, the creaking of floorboards overhead. But that was impossible. The only thing above was the attic, which she hadn't yet explored. Grabbing a flashlight, she found the attic door and pulled down the ladder. Dust particles floated in the beam of light as she climbed up. The attic was cluttered with antique furniture, trunks, and forgotten memories. In the corner stood the portrait of Amara, propped up on an old easel. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. "How did it get here?" "Isabella," a soft voice whispered. She spun around, the flashlight beam dancing across the room. "Who's there?" Silence. Mustering her courage, she spoke louder. "If someone is here, show yourself." A shadow moved behind a stack of boxes. She approached slowly. "I won't hurt you." As she turned the corner, the flashlight flickered and died, plunging the attic into darkness. Fear tightened its grip on her. She fumbled with the flashlight, tapping it until the light sputtered back on. Standing directly in front of her was the woman from the portrait. Isabella stumbled backward, tripping over a trunk and falling to the floor. The woman's face was emotionless, her eyes void of light. "Oh, what are you?" Isabella stammered. The woman tilted her head. "I am what you will become." Before Isabella could react, the woman lunged forward, her form dissolving into a shadow that enveloped Isabella. She felt a coldness seep into her bones, a paralysis that rooted her to the spot. Memories not her own flooded her mind, glimpses of a life from centuries past, of betrayal, and a darkness that consumed all. She realized with dawning horror that Amara had been trapped, waiting for someone to free her. "Thank you," the voice echoed inside her head. "At last I am free." Isabella mustered all her strength to fight back. "You can't take my life." Amara's laughter rang out. "It's already mine." With a surge of willpower, Isabella broke free from the shadow's grip and scrambled toward the attic entrance. She climbed down the ladder and slammed the door shut behind her. She raced to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were sealed, the glass unbreakable. The house had become a prison. Desperate, she remembered the mirror in the cellar. Perhaps it held the key to reversing this nightmare. She dashed down the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste. Reaching the cellar, she found the mirror just as she'd left it. Her reflection stared back, but it wasn't her. It was Amara, smiling wickedly. "There's nowhere to run," Amara taunted. Isabella glared at the mirror. "I won't let you take me." Amara's eyes narrowed. "You have no choice." In a moment of defiance, Isabella picked up a broken piece of wood and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered, fragments scattering across the floor. A piercing scream echoed through the cellar as the lights flickered violently. The shadowy form of Amara emerged from the broken mirror, writhing in agony. "You fool," she shrieked. "You've doomed us both." The cellar walls began to shake, chunks of stone crumbling as the foundation destabilized. Isabella turned to flee, but the staircase collapsed, trapping her below. Amara's form began to dissolve, the shadows dissipating. "If I cannot have life, then neither shall you." she hissed before vanishing completely. Debris fell around Isabella as she searched for an escape. The air grew thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. In the corner, she noticed a faint glow, a hidden passage revealed by the collapsing wall. With no other option, she squeezed through the narrow opening. The passage led to a small chamber illuminated by a strange, ethereal light. In the center stood an ancient pedestal with a leather-bound journal atop it. She opened the journal, skimming through pages filled with handwritten notes and sketches. It detailed rituals and spells, a family history steeped in dark magic. One entry stood out. Amara's thirst for eternal life has led her to trap her own soul within the confines of a portrait. Should the mirror be broken, the curse will consume the vessel, and all shall be lost. Only by reconciling with the past can the cycle be broken. Isabella realized that destroying the mirror had only made things worse. The house was collapsing because the curse was spiraling out of control. Reconciling with the past, she whispered. But how? She rifled through the journal, searching for a solution. A final page held a simple incantation, a plea for forgiveness and release. With the cellar crumbling around her, she recited the words aloud, her voice steady despite the chaos. A calm settled over the chamber. The light intensified, enveloping her. She felt a presence beside her, Amara, no longer menacing but sorrowful. "Forgive me," Amara whispered. "I was consumed by my fear of death." Isabella met her gaze. "We all fear the unknown, but trapping others won't save you." Amara nodded slowly. "I release you." The house groaned one last time before falling silent. The walls stood firm, the debris vanished. Isabella found herself back in the main hall, the morning sun filtering through the windows. The portrait of Amara hung on the wall, her expression now peaceful. The mirror was whole once more, reflecting only Isabella. She breathed a sigh of relief. The nightmare was over. Over the following weeks, Isabella continued restoring the manor. She kept the portrait as a reminder of the encounter, honoring Amara's memory. One evening, as she was painting in the garden, she noticed a blooming rose bush that hadn't been there before. Among the roses was a single black rose. She smiled, sensing Amara's presence watching over the estate. Isabella had not only found inspiration, but had also uncovered a connection to the past, one that taught her about forgiveness, acceptance, and the dangers of letting fear control one's destiny. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Daniel was an oceanographer with a lifelong fascination for the uncharted depths of the sea. When he received an invitation to join a research expedition exploring a newly discovered trench in the Pacific, he couldn't resist. The trench, deeper than the Mariana, had been detected only weeks prior by a remote sensing satellite. It was an opportunity to witness parts of the world no human eyes had ever seen. The ship, the Odyssey, set sail under a cloak of stars. The crew was small but dedicated. Seasoned sailors, fellow scientists, and Marie, an experienced submersible pilot. As they approached the coordinates, a sense of anticipation mingled with an unspoken unease settled over everyone. On the first day of exploration, Daniel and Marie prepared to descend in the submersible, aptly named Deep Seeker. The vessel was state-of-the-art, equipped with cameras, robotic arms, and reinforced hull plating to withstand the immense pressures of the deep. "Ready to make history?" Marie asked, flashing a confident smile. "Let's see what's hiding down there," Daniel replied, his excitement barely contained. As they descended, sunlight faded into darkness, and the temperature plummeted. The only light came from the submersible's powerful beams, which sliced through the inky blackness. Strange, bioluminescent creatures flitted past, reacting to the intrusion with alien curiosity. At 20,000 feet, they began to approach the ocean floor. The trench walls loomed on either side, rough and scarred. Suddenly, the sonar picked up a massive cavern entrance in the side of the trench. "That's odd," Daniel muttered. "There's a hollow space within the trench wall. Should we check it out?" Marie asked. He hesitated for a moment. "Let's take a quick look." They guided the Deep Seeker toward the cavern. Crossing the threshold, they found themselves in a vast underwater chamber. The walls were lined with peculiar, iridescent flora that seemed to pulse with a faint light. Are those plants? Marie whispered. Some kind of deep-sea life forms. Daniel replied, awestruck. This environment shouldn't be able to support such growth. As they ventured deeper, the submersible's instruments began to malfunction. The compass spun erratically, and the sonar displayed only static. Equipment's acting up, Marie said, tapping the screens. A sudden jolt rocked the vessel. What was that? Daniel exclaimed. Before they could react, something massive slammed into them, sending the submersible spiraling. Lights flickered as alarms blared. We've been hit, Marie shouted, wrestling with the controls. I can't stabilize her. The external cameras caught a fleeting glimpse of a colossal shadow darting away, too fast to identify. Did you see that? Daniel asked, panic rising. Hold on, Marie yelled as the submersible lurched again, descending uncontrollably. They crashed onto a rocky ledge. The lights went out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency backups kicked in, casting a dim red glow inside the cabin. Are you okay? Marie asked, breathing heavily. I think so, Daniel replied, checking himself for injuries. What about the sub? Marie scanned the controls. Controls are unresponsive. We're stuck. A deep, resonant sound reverberated through the water, like a distant moan. It grew louder, surrounding them. Is that whale song? Daniel wondered. Not any whale I've ever heard, Marie said, her eyes wide. The sound intensified, vibrating the very structure of the submersible. Cracks began to form on the viewport. This can't be happening, Marie whispered. A hairline fracture snaked across the glass. Water seeped in, droplets turning into streams. We need to seal our suits, Daniel said urgently. They hurriedly donned their helmets, locking them into place just as the viewport shattered. Water flooded the cabin, and the submersible creaked under the pressure. Switch to suit oxygen, Daniel instructed. As the submersible settled, they found themselves partially submerged but alive. The external lights flickered back on, illuminating the cavern floor. Look, Marie pointed. Scattered across the seabed were remnants of ships and submarines, some ancient, others modern, graveyard of lost vessels. Among the wreckage were skeletal remains, eerily preserved by the depths. This isn't possible, Daniel said, his voice trembling. These ships are from different eras, different parts of the world. A movement caught their attention. From the shadows emerged a figure, humanoid but elongated, with limbs too thin and joints bending at unnatural angles. Its eyes glowed faintly, devoid of emotion. What is that? Marie gasped. More figures appeared, surrounding them. The beings moved with a fluid grace, undulating through the water. We have to get out of here, Daniel urged. But how? The sub is destroyed. Before they could devise a plan, one of the creatures approached, tilting its head as if studying them. It reached out a webbed hand and touched Marie's helmet. Stay back, she screamed, swatting at it. The creature recoiled, then opened its mouth to emit a sound, a distorted mimicry of human speech. Leave now. Did it just speak? Daniel asked in disbelief. Another creature pointed toward a narrow passageway, illuminated by the bioluminescent plants. I think they're showing us a way out, Marie said. Do we trust them? Do we have a choice? They exited the submersible, the weight of the water pressing against their suits. Moving cautiously, they followed the creatures through the passage. The path wound upward, and Daniel noticed carvings on the cavern walls, depictions of the creatures interacting with humans, disasters at sea, and ships being pulled into the depths. They've been here for centuries, he realized. Maybe longer. The passage opened into a larger chamber where an enormous stone structure stood, a monolith covered in glyphs and symbols. At its base lay an artifact, a glowing orb pulsating with energy. One of the creatures gestured toward it. Destroy. To be free. Marie stepped forward. They want us to destroy it. Wait, Daniel cautioned. We don't know what it is. The creatures began to surround them again, their movements more urgent. Daniel, we have to do something. Reluctantly, he nodded. Together, they lifted a heavy piece of debris and brought it down onto the orb. It shattered, releasing a shockwave that rippled through the water. The cavern trembled, rocks dislodging from the ceiling. We need to get out of here, Daniel shouted. The creatures guided them toward another exit, a tunnel leading upward. They swam with all their might, the tremors growing more violent. As they ascended, the water grew brighter. Breaking the surface, they found themselves in open ocean beneath a starlit sky. The Odyssey was visible in the distance. They're going to think we're hallucinating, Daniel said between gasps. Let's worry about that later, Marie replied. They swam toward the ship, where the astonished crew pulled them aboard. What happened down there? The captain demanded. Before they could answer, a low rumble echoed across the sea. A massive whirlpool formed where the trench had been, slowly diminishing until the water was calm once more. It's gone, Daniel whispered. In the days that followed, they tried to explain what they'd witnessed, but the data was corrupted, and their accounts met with skepticism. Back on land, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Late at night, he'd hear whispers echoing in his mind, a chorus of voices warning him. One evening, as he walked along the shoreline, he noticed figures standing in the surf. They resembled the creatures from the cavern, their eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Why are you here?" he called out. A familiar voice answered. Marie stepped forward, but her eyes now glowed like theirs. "You released us," she said softly. "But the barrier between worlds is fragile." "What do you mean?" Fear gripped him. "You've opened the way," she continued. "They're coming." Behind her, more figures emerged from the waves, countless shapes rising from the deep. Daniel stumbled back. "No, this can't be. The ocean holds many secrets," Marie whispered, "and not all are meant to be uncovered." As the beings advanced, Daniel realized that by destroying the orb, they hadn't freed themselves. They had unleashed something far more sinister. He turned to run, but the tide surged unnaturally, water grabbing at his ankles. The whispers grew louder, enveloping him. The next day, authorities found only his footprints leading into the sea, ending abruptly at the water's edge. In the weeks that followed, reports surfaced of strange sightings along coastlines worldwide. Unknown creatures glimpsed in the depths, ships disappearing without a trace, and eerie whispers carried on the ocean breeze. Humanity had long believed it had conquered the seas, but Daniel's fate was a grim reminder. Some mysteries are best left undisturbed, for the deep guards its secrets jealously, and the echoes of the deep would now haunt the surface world forever. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Michael had always been a man of science, grounded in logic and reason. As a psychiatrist specializing in sleep disorders, he prided himself on helping patients navigate the labyrinth of their subconscious. So when a series of unexplainable nightmares began plaguing him, he was both intrigued and unsettled. It started subtly, a vague sense of unease, shadows that seemed darker than they should be, whispers that faded just as he turned to listen. Dismissing it as stress, he buried himself in work, refusing to acknowledge the growing dread gnawing at the edges of his mind. One evening, after a particularly long day, Michael returned to his empty apartment. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside, silence pressed down like a weight. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, hoping to unwind, when his phone buzzed with a new email. Subject: "We need to talk." The sender was anonymous. Curious, he opened it. "They're coming for you. The shadows know your name." He frowned, deleting the message as spam. But as he moved to close his laptop, another email appeared. Subject: "You can't hide. Look outside your window." A chill ran down his spine. Against his better judgment, he approached the window. The street below was bathed in the amber glow of streetlights, people moving about like shadows themselves. Nothing unusual. Then he saw it, a figure standing across the street, staring directly up at him. It was tall, cloaked in darkness, features obscured. Michael's heart pounded. He blinked, and the figure was gone. "Get a grip," he muttered, stepping away from the window. He decided to call it a night, hoping sleep would bring clarity. But sleep offered no solace. He found himself in a dream, standing in an endless hallway lined with mirrors. Each reflection showed him aging rapidly, hair graying, skin sagging, eyes hollowing, until he was nothing but a skeleton draped in tattered flesh. From behind, Whispers echoed. Turning, he saw shadowy figures emerging from the darkness, their bodies twisting and contorting unnaturally. They reached out with elongated fingers, mouths stretching into voids as they released a deafening scream. He jolted awake, drenched in sweat, the scream still ringing in his ears. But the room was silent, too silent. The usual hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of traffic, all absent. The air felt thick, oppressive. His bedroom door creaked open slowly. "Hello," he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. No response. He reached for his phone, but it was dead. The clock on his bedside table blinked erratically before fading to black. Darkness swallowed the room, save for a sliver of moonlight creeping through the curtains. A low whisper seeped from the hallway. "Michael." He froze. The voice was distorted, as if spoken through layers of static. Gathering his courage, he stepped out of bed and moved toward the doorway. The hallway stretched impossibly long, far longer than his apartment allowed. Shadows danced along the walls, shapes that shouldn't exist. At the far end stood a door he didn't recognize, ancient and wooden, with symbols carved deep into its surface. Compelled by a force he couldn't resist, he walked toward it. Each step echoed unnaturally, the sound amplified in the void. As he reached for the handle, the whispers intensified, overlapping until they were a cacophony of torment. He opened the door. Inside was a room identical to his childhood bedroom, untouched by time. Toys were scattered on the floor, and posters adorned the walls. On the bed sat a small boy, himself at age 6. The child looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Why did you leave me?" he asked, voice quivering. Michael's chest tightened. I didn't. You forgot about me," the boy whispered. "And now they're here. Who is here?" The shadows in the corners of the room began to writhe and swell, consuming the light. From within them, eyes gleamed, dozens of eyes fixated on him. "The forgotten," the child said. "They feed on memories, on the pieces of us we abandoned." The shadows lunged forward. Michael stumbled back, slamming the door and fleeing down the endless hallway. Doors on either side burst open as he passed, releasing torrents of darkness that clawed at his heels. He could hear them, whispers of his own voice, taunting and cruel. "You fail. You abandoned everyone. You're alone." Desperate, he screamed, "This isn't real." Suddenly, he was back in his apartment, collapsed on the living room floor. The normal sounds had returned, the hum of appliances, the distant city life. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. A notification chimed on his phone, now somehow functional. Hands shaking, he opened the message. Subject: "Reality is fragile. Did you enjoy our game?" Anger flared. "Who are you?" he shouted into the empty room. A reply came instantly. "Look behind you." He refused, gripping the phone tightly. "No, I won't play your games." The lights flickered, and the temperature plummeted. His breath formed clouds in the icy air. "You can't ignore us forever." Shadows pooled beneath his feet, tendrils creeping up his legs. Panic surged as he tried to move, but his limbs were anchored by the darkness solidifying around him. Faces formed in the shadows, distorted versions of himself at different ages, each wearing an expression of despair. "Let me go," he pleaded. They spoke in unison. "We are the pieces you've discarded, the guilt, the pain, the fear. You can't be whole without us." "I don't understand." The room distorted, walls bending inward as if the apartment were collapsing into itself. The shadows engulfed him, pulling him into a void where time and space ceased to exist. He landed in a barren landscape under a starless sky. The ground was covered in ash, the air thick with the stench of decay. In the distance, a figure stood, tall, cloaked, and unmistakably the same one from the street. It beckoned him forward. With no other options, Michael approached. As he neared, the figure lowered its hood to reveal a face identical to his own, but twisted, eyes sunken, skin marred by cracks seeping darkness. "Welcome to your inner self," the doppelganger hissed. "This isn't me," Michael protested. "You're not real." "Oh, but I am," it retorted. "I am every fear you've suppressed, every guilt you've buried. And now, I will consume you." Shadows erupted from the ground, wrapping around him like serpents. He struggled, but they tightened their grip, squeezing the air from his lungs. "Why are you doing this?" he gasped. "Because you denied us," the entity snarled. "And now, we will become the dominant force." As consciousness faded, memories flooded back. Patients he'd failed to help, relationships he let wither, moments where he chose work over human connection. The weight of his regrets bore down, crushing his spirit. In his final moments, he realized the truth. The shadows were manifestations of his own psyche, a reckoning for a life half-lived. He awoke in his office, sunlight streaming through the windows. Disoriented, he checked the time, 8 a.m. His first patient would arrive soon. Was it all a dream? He wondered aloud. A knock at the door startled him. "Come in," he called. A woman entered, her face obscured by shadows despite the well-lit room. "I'm here for my appointment," she said, voice eerily familiar. "Have we met before?" he asked, unease settling in. She smiled slowly. "You could say that." Her eyes met his, and he saw they were entirely black. Panic surged. He tried to stand, but his body wouldn't respond. The shadows in the corners of the room began to spread, crawling up the walls. "What do you want?" he whispered. "We want you to remember," she replied, her form shifting and flickering. "You can't escape us." He closed his eyes, willing it all to disappear. When he opened them again, he was alone. The office was normal. He exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. The phone rang, causing him to jump. He answered hesitantly. "Hello." A distorted version of his own voice echoed on the line. "You can't hide from yourself." He slammed the phone down, heart racing. Over the following days, reality continued to unravel. Reflections showed him smiling when he wasn't. Shadows moved independently, and patients spoke in voices from his nightmares. Sleep deprived and desperate, he decided to confront the darkness. Returning home, he stood in the center of his apartment. "Show yourself," he demanded. "Silence. I know you're a part of me. Let's end this." A slow clap resonated from behind. Turning, he faced his shadow self once more. Finally ready to accept the truth, it asked mockingly. "Yes," Michael affirmed. "I acknowledge my failures, my fears, all of it. But I won't let you control me." The entity sneered. "It's not that simple." "Maybe not," he conceded. "But I'm choosing to face you." The shadows began to swirl violently, the apartment shaking as if caught in a storm. Objects flew off shelves, windows shattered, but Michael stood firm. As the chaos intensified, he closed his eyes and focused inward, embracing the emotions he'd long suppressed. Gradually, the tumult subsided. Opening his eyes, he found the entity fading, its form dissolving into tendrils of smoke. "This isn't over," it warned, voice diminishing. "Maybe not," Michael replied, "but I'm not running anymore." With a final glare, the entity vanished. The apartment was in ruins, but a sense of peace settled over him. For the first time in years, he felt whole. But as he began to clean up, a whisper brushed past his ear. "We'll be waiting." He paused, a chill creeping up his spine. Perhaps the shadows would always be a part of him, a reminder of the darkness that lurks within. But now, he knew that acknowledging his fears was the first step in overcoming them. That night, Michael slept dreamlessly, the whispers silenced. Yet, in the deepest corners of the night, when silence reigns and shadows stretch, one can never be certain if the darkness within remains truly at bay, or if it's merely gathering strength to rise once more. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Jonathan Miller was a skeptic by nature, a renowned journalist known for debunking urban legends and supernatural hoaxes. So when he received an anonymous tip about Blackwood Manor, a mansion steeped in dark rumors and whispered fears, he saw it as just another story to unravel. Located on the outskirts of a small, desolate town, Blackwood Manor had been abandoned for decades. Locals spoke of strange lights, eerie noises, and people who ventured inside never returning. Jonathan dismissed these as mere tales spun by superstitious minds. Determined to expose the truth, he packed his camera, voice recorder, and a notebook, setting out on a dreary autumn morning. The sky was overcast, a thick blanket of clouds casting the world in shades of gray. As he approached the manor, a sense of unease settled over him. The wrought iron gates stood ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Vines twisted around the bars like serpents, and the once grand facade of the house was now marred by decay. Windows shattered, paint peeled, and the roof sagging in places. "Just an old house," Jonathan muttered, pushing the gates open wider. The path leading to the front door was overgrown, weeds reaching up like grasping hands. Crows perched along the rooftop, their black eyes following his every move. He felt a chill but shrugged it off as the crisp autumn air. He reached the massive wooden door, its surface carved with intricate patterns now faded and worn. With a firm push, it groaned open, revealing a grand foyer cloaked in darkness. The scent of mildew and dust filled his nostrils. Jonathan clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. A grand staircase curved upward, and doorways led to various rooms on either side. He began his exploration, voice recorder in hand. Entering Blackwood Manor, he spoke into the device. Initial impressions, typical of long-abandoned properties. No signs of recent activity. As he moved deeper into the house, the atmosphere grew heavier. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant dripping of water and the occasional scurry of unseen rodents. In the parlor, he found remnants of the past. A grand piano draped in a tattered sheet, portraits of stern-looking individuals whose eyes seemed to follow him, and a fireplace cold and empty. He examined one of the portraits, a woman dressed in Victorian attire, her expression stern yet sorrowful. A plaque read, "Eleanor Blackwood, 1887. Perhaps the lady of the house," Jonathan noted. A sudden thud echoed from upstairs. He startled, heart skipping a beat. Probably just an animal, he reasoned. Deciding to investigate, he ascended the staircase. Each step creaked, and the railing wobbled under his grip. At the top, a long hallway stretched before him, doors lining either side like sentinels guarding secrets. He tried the first door. It opened to a bedroom frozen in time. Toys lay scattered on the floor, a small bed unmade, and a music box atop a dresser. He approached the music box, its ornate design catching his eye. He lifted the lid. Instead of music, a chilling whisper emanated. "Leave. Now." He recoiled, slamming the lid shut. A trick of the wind? A faulty mechanism? Get it together, he told himself. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hallway, deliberate and heavy. "Hello," he called out. "Is someone there?" No response. He stepped back into the hallway. At the far end stood a figure, a man tall and gaunt, dressed in outdated clothing. His face was obscured by shadows. "Sir, this is private property," Jonathan said, masking his unease with authority. The figure remained motionless. Jonathan shone his flashlight down the hall, but as the beam reached the figure, it vanished. A knot formed in his stomach. This isn't possible. He reviewed his recordings, but interference distorted the audio, a static hiss interspersed with faint whispers. Determined to find a rational explanation, he continued exploring. Entering another room, he found a library, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with dusty tomes, a massive chandelier hanging precariously above. On a desk lay an open journal. The writing was spidery and faded, but legible. October 13th, 1892. The voices grow louder each night. They whisper secrets no one should know. Eleanor insists it's all in my mind, but I see them watching, waiting. A chill crept up his spine. Flipping through more pages, the entries became more erratic, filled with drawings of shadowy figures and frantic scrawls of "they are here." A loud crash jolted him, sounded like shattered glass. He rushed back into the hallway. The chandelier he'd passed moments before now lay in pieces on the floor. "That could have killed me," he whispered. The realization that he might not be alone after all began to sink in. Perhaps vagrants or thrill-seekers were hiding within the manor. He decided to leave, his skepticism waning. Retracing his steps, he headed toward the staircase, but the layout seemed different. Hallways stretched in unfamiliar directions. Doors appeared where there were none before. Panic set in. This can't be. He tried door after door, each leading to rooms he didn't recognize. A dilapidated ballroom with decayed decorations, a nursery with cobweb-covered cradles, a dining hall set for a feast long since spoiled. His flashlight flickered, then died, plunging him into darkness. Fumbling for his phone, he turned on its flashlight, a weak beam compared to his primary one. Whispers began to surround him, indistinct at first but growing clearer. "Join us. Stay forever." "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice echoing unnaturally. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, darting just out of sight whenever he tried to focus on them. He stumbled into the foyer, or at least what he thought was the foyer. The grand staircase was gone, replaced by a narrow spiral one descending into darkness. Desperate, he considered his options. Staying put might be more dangerous than venturing forth. Taking a deep breath, he began to descend. The steps were steep, and the air grew colder with each turn. The whispers intensified, now accompanied by faint laughter. Reaching the bottom, he found himself in a stone chamber lit by flickering torches. Symbols were etched into the walls, ancient runes that pulsed with a faint glow. In the center stood an altar, and atop it lay a book bound in aged leather. Compelled by a force beyond his understanding, he approached. The book opened on its own, pages flipping rapidly before settling. Words formed on the page. The skeptic arrives, unbidden yet expected. The house hungers, and the cycle continues. Fear gripped him. "What do you want from me?" he screamed into the void. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed around him. "Your disbelief feeds us. Stay, and become part of the legacy." He backed away, but the shadows closed in, forming a circle around him. Faces emerged. Eleanor Blackwood, the gaunt man from the hallway, countless others, all trapped souls. "This isn't real. It's a hallucination," he stammered. "Is it?" Eleanor whispered, her eyes void of life. "You sought the truth, and now you shall join it." They advanced, hands outstretched. Cold fingers brushed his skin, sapping warmth and strength. "No!" He bolted, breaking through a gap in the circle. He ran blindly, corridors twisting and morphing around him. The manor was alive, shifting to confound his escape. He burst into a room filled with mirrors. His reflection stared back, but each one was altered. Eyes black, mouths twisted into sinister smiles. "Give in," they whispered in unison. Clutching his head, he shut his eyes tight. This isn't happening. A hand grasped his shoulder. He spun around to see the gaunt man looming over him. "Your skepticism binds you," the man said. "Embrace the unknown, and you might yet be free." Desperate, Jonathan pleaded, "How? Tell me what to do." "Accept that not everything can be explained. Sometimes belief is the key." Gathering his courage, he nodded. I believe in you, in this house, in everything." The shadows recoiled, and the oppressive weight began to lift. The man stepped back, then run. "Do not look back." Jonathan didn't hesitate. He raced through the door, the manor no longer shifting against him. He found the grand staircase restored, the front door visible beyond. As he reached for the exit, Eleanor's voice echoed softly. "Remember us." He paused for the briefest moment before pushing the door open and stumbling outside. The cold night air hit him like a wave, the sky now clear and dotted with stars. He didn't stop running until he was back at his car. Fumbling with the keys, he started the engine and sped away. In the safety of his home, Jonathan tried to make sense of the experience. His recordings were distorted beyond recognition, photos blurred and useless. The rational part of his mind wanted to dismiss it as a stress-induced hallucination, but deep down, he knew better. He penned an article, not the expose he'd intended, but a heartfelt piece about the limits of skepticism and the mysteries that defy explanation. Months later, the article garnered attention, sparking debates and discussions. Some praised his openness, while others accused him of abandoning reason. One evening, as he was organizing files, he found an old photograph tucked between pages, a portrait of Eleanor Blackwood. On the back, in elegant script, was written, "Thank you." A chill ran down his spine, but a faint smile touched his lips. From that day on, Jonathan approached his work with a newfound respect for the unknown. He continued his investigations but remained open to possibilities beyond logic. Yet, sometimes, in the quiet moments of the night, he'd catch shadows moving just beyond the corner of his eye or hear a soft whisper calling his name. He knew the manor had left its mark on him, a reminder that some doors, once opened, remain ajar, and some paths, once taken, intertwine with our own forever. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Leonard was an artist teetering on the brink of obscurity. Once celebrated for his vivid imagination and unique style, he now sat in his dimly lit studio, surrounded by unfinished paintings and crumpled sketches. Inspiration had abandoned him, leaving a void that he desperately sought to fill. One rainy evening, wandering aimlessly through the city's winding streets, Leonard stumbled upon an antique shop he'd never noticed before. The sign above the door read, "The Emporium of Lost Treasures." Drawn by an inexplicable urge, he pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The shop was a labyrinth of peculiar artifacts, tarnished jewelry, moth-eaten tapestries, and books with titles in languages he couldn't decipher. Amidst the clutter, a large, dust-covered canvas leaned against the far wall. Its frame was ornate, carved with intricate symbols and patterns that seemed to shift when not directly observed. "Ah, you have a keen eye," came a voice from behind. Leonard turned to see an old man with piercing gray eyes and a sly smile. "What can you tell me about this canvas?" Leonard asked. The old man's gaze intensified. "It's a rare find, blank, yet full of potential. They say it brings visions to those who seek them." "How much?" Leonard inquired, a flicker of hope igniting within him. "For you, a token price," the shopkeeper replied. "But be warned, true inspiration often comes at a cost." Dismissing the cryptic caution, Leonard purchased the canvas and hurried back to his studio. He set it up prominently, the blank surface almost glowing in the dim light. That night, he dreamed of swirling colors and shadowy figures whispering secrets. The next morning, he awoke with a jolt. To his astonishment, a rough outline had appeared on the canvas, stark and haunting images of a dense forest under a blood-red sky. He didn't remember painting anything, yet the brush strokes were undeniably his. Compelled, Leonard began to work feverishly, enhancing the outlines, adding depth and detail. The process was hypnotic. Hours slipped by unnoticed. Upon completion, he stepped back to admire his work, a masterpiece unlike anything he'd ever created. News of his stunning new painting spread quickly. Galleries clamored to display it, critics sang his praises, and patrons eagerly awaited his next piece. Success had returned, and with it, an insatiable desire to create more. But with each new painting, the toll on Leonard grew. The subjects became darker, desolate landscapes, anguished figures, and scenes of chaos and despair. Moreover, he began to experience unsettling phenomena, whispers echoing in his studio, shadows that seemed to move on their own, and a chilling presence that loomed over him as he worked. One night, while putting the finishing touches on a particularly grim piece, Leonard heard a distinct voice hiss behind him. "Join us." He spun around, but no one was there. The room fell into deep silence, the air thick with foreboding. Deciding he needed a break, he left the studio to get some fresh air. Outside, the city felt different, quieter, emptier. Streetlights flickered, and the few passers-by avoided his gaze. Heading back, he noticed the antique shop across the street, lights flickering invitingly. Perhaps the old man could explain what was happening. Entering the shop, Leonard found it deserted. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs hung like veils. On the counter lay a faded newspaper clipping dated over 50 years ago. The headline read, "Mysterious Inferno Destroys Antique Emporium. Owner Missing, Feared Dead." A cold dread washed over him. How could this be? He had been in the shop just days ago. A whisper slithered through the silence. "You can't escape." Heart pounding, Leonard fled back to his studio. Bursting through the door, he was met with a horrifying sight. All his paintings had transformed. The canvases now bore his own image, each depicting him in various states of torment. From one, his painted self turned to look at him, eyes hollow and despairing. "You did this," it mouthed. He stumbled back, tripping over scattered brushes. The walls began to close in, the room distorting as shadows oozed from the corners, coalescing into humanoid forms with eyes like voids. Desperate, Leonard grabbed a palette knife and slashed at the nearest painting. A scream erupted, not from the canvas, but from within his own mind. Agony unlike anything he'd ever known seared through him. The shadows closed in, their whispers now a cacophony. "We are the Forsaken, bound by the strokes of your brush, condemned to eternal unrest. And now, you will join us." "Why? I didn't mean for any of this," Leonard cried out. A figure stepped forward from the mass, the old shopkeeper. But his face was now gaunt, skin stretched tight over sharp bones, eyes glowing with malice. "Inspiration demands sacrifice," he intoned. "You took from the well of souls to revive your talent, and now the debt must be paid." Realization struck Leonard. The canvas had been a conduit, channeling tormented spirits into his art. Each masterpiece was a fragment of their suffering, and he had unwittingly bound them, and himself, to a cursed fate. "No, there must be a way to undo this," he pleaded. The shopkeeper's grin widened impossibly. "There is no escape. Your soul is ours." In a final act of defiance, Leonard seized a can of turpentine and doused the canvases. Igniting a match, he set them ablaze. Flames roared to life, consuming the paintings and casting grotesque shadows that writhed and screamed. The fire spread rapidly, engulfing the studio. Smoke filled the room, choking him. As the inferno intensified, the floor gave way, and Leonard plunged into darkness. He awoke to the sound of steady beeping and muffled voices. Opening his eyes, he found himself in a hospital bed, bandaged and weak. "You're lucky to be alive," a nurse said gently. "Your building caught fire. The firefighters pulled you out just in time." "Fire," he murmured, memories hazy. "Rest now," she advised before leaving the room. Relief washed over him. It had to have been a nightmare brought on by exhaustion and fumes. Days later, discharged and eager to start anew, Leonard rented a modest apartment. Determined to return to honest work, he bought fresh supplies and a simple canvas. But as he began to paint, his hand moved involuntarily, strokes forming shapes he didn't intend. The image of the old shopkeeper emerged, eyes piercing through the canvas. Panicked, Leonard tore the painting apart. But every canvas he touched betrayed him, manifesting the same haunting visage. Messages began to appear on his walls, scrawled in charcoal. "You are bound. There is no release." Shadows once again crept at the edges of his vision, and the whispers returned, now louder and more insistent. Sleepless and tormented, Leonard realized that the curse was irreversible. The souls he had exploited demanded his own in perpetual penance. In a final attempt to escape his fate, he locked himself away, refusing to create. Weeks turned into months, isolation eroding his sanity. Yet the haunting never ceased. One cold, silent night, Leonard gazed out the window, a hollow shell of the man he once was. The city lights flickered, mirroring the chaos within his mind. From behind him, a familiar voice whispered, "It's time." He didn't turn around. There was no point. "I know," he replied softly. The shadows enveloped him, a cold embrace that extinguished the last flicker of his resistance. As darkness consumed his vision, he felt both terror and a twisted sense of relief. The next morning, the landlord found Leonard's apartment empty. No furniture, no art supplies, nothing but blank canvases stacked against the walls. Of Leonard, there was no trace. Back at the old antique shop, now miraculously restored, the old shopkeeper stood behind the counter. A new painting hung on the wall, a portrait of Leonard, eyes wide with a mix of horror and resignation. A customer entered, the bell jingling softly. "Interesting piece," she remarked, admiring the portrait. "Is it for sale?" The shopkeeper smiled slyly. "Everything has a price," he said. "But be warned, true inspiration often demands a sacrifice." If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Dr. Emily Carter was a seasoned psychiatrist known for her work with trauma patients. When she received an invitation to evaluate the abandoned Willowbrook Asylum for a potential redevelopment project, she saw it as an opportunity to bring closure to a place shrouded in mystery and pain. Located deep within a dense forest, Willowbrook had been closed for over 50 years after reports of unethical experiments and patient disappearances. Locals whispered of restless spirits and unexplained phenomena, but Emily dismissed these tales as superstitions born from a dark history. On a gray, overcast morning, Emily arrived at the asylum's entrance. The building loomed before her, its Gothic architecture marred by time. Vines crawled up the cracked stone walls, and broken windows stared like empty eyes. A wrought iron gate, rusted and ajar, creaked in the wind. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The grand foyer was littered with debris, broken furniture, scattered papers, and peeling paint hanging like dead skin from the walls. Just an old building, she muttered, clicking on her flashlight. Her task was to assess the asylum's condition and retrieve any remaining patient records for historical preservation. She began in the administrative wing, sifting through file cabinets and desks. Most documents were too damaged to salvage, but she managed to find a few intact files. As she ventured deeper into the asylum, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edge of her vision, and distant echoes whispered through the corridors. "Hello," she called out, her voice swallowed by the silence. No response. In the east wing, she discovered the treatment rooms. Rusted gurneys lay overturned, and archaic medical equipment was strewn about. On one wall, she noticed a series of photographs, a gallery of former patients. Their eyes were blacked out, and some had cryptic symbols scrawled over them. A chill ran down her spine. She snapped photos with her phone for documentation. Continuing on, she found a heavy door marked basement. Authorized personnel only. Curiosity gnawed at her. Perhaps the most valuable records were stored below. The door groaned as it opened, revealing a stairwell descending into darkness. The smell of damp earth intensified as she descended, each step echoing ominously. At the bottom, the beam of her flashlight illuminated a long hallway lined with cell-like rooms. Chains hung from the ceilings, and scratch marks marred the stone floors and walls. "What happened here?" she whispered. A faint sound caught her attention, a soft sobbing echoing from the far end of the corridor. "Is someone there?" she called out, her heartbeat quickening. The sobbing continued, punctuated by whispers she couldn't quite discern. Gathering her courage, Emily moved toward the sound. The last cell on the left had its door slightly ajar. She peered inside. A young girl sat curled in the corner, her long dark hair obscuring her face. She wore a tattered hospital gown, and her bare feet were dirty and bruised. "Are you okay?" Emily asked gently. "How did you get in here?" The girl didn't respond. Emily stepped inside, reaching out a hand. "Let me help you." Suddenly, the girl lifted her head, revealing hollow eyes and a mouth sewn shut with coarse thread. She reached out, grasping Emily's wrist with an icy grip. Emily gasped, trying to pull away, but the girl's strength was unnatural. Whispers flooded her mind, a cacophony of voices screaming, pleading, accusing. "Set us free," they demanded. A surge of images overwhelmed her. Patients subjected to horrific treatments, trapped souls wandering the asylum's endless corridors, in a darkness that fed on their suffering. With a desperate yank, Emily broke free and stumbled backward into the hallway. The cell door slammed shut on its own, and the sobbing ceased. Heart pounding, she raced back toward the stairs, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly. Doors that were once closed now stood open, shadows spilling out like ink. Figures emerged, distorted silhouettes of former patients. They reached out with skeletal hands, their eyes voids of despair. "Join us," they whispered in unison. Emily turned and fled in the opposite direction, her flashlight flickering. She found herself in a vast treatment room that hadn't been there before. In the center stood an ominous device resembling an electric chair, wires snaking across the floor. A tall figure loomed beside it, a doctor in a blood-stained lab coat, face obscured by a cracked surgical mask. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped. "What do you want from me?" Emily cried, He pointed a gloved finger at her. They must remain. You cannot release them. I don't understand. The walls began to close in, the ceiling lowering as the room darkened. The ghostly patients surrounded her, their expressions a mix of anguish and rage. Feel our pain, they chanted. An unbearable pressure built inside her head, the voices growing louder. She fell to her knees, hands over her ears. Please stop, she begged. Amidst the chaos, a faint light glowed from her pocket, the files she had collected earlier. Remembering her purpose, she pulled them out. The names matched the faces of the tormented spirits. I can tell your stories, she said, her voice trembling. I can let the world know what happened to you. The chanting paused. The apparitions exchanged glances, their forms flickering. You would do that? A young man asked, his eyes filled with hope. Yes, Emily affirmed. You don't have to be forgotten. The oppressive atmosphere began to lift. The doctor snarled, silence. They belong to me. He advanced toward her, but the patients formed a protective barrier. No more, the girl with the sewn mouth projected into Emily's mind. We choose freedom. The spirits joined hands, their collective glow intensifying. The doctor recoiled, his form distorting before dissipating into shadow. The building trembled, dust and debris raining down. You must go, the young man urged. Tell our stories. Emily nodded and sprinted back the way she came. This time, the path remained clear. She ascended the stairs and burst through the front doors just as the sun broke through the clouds. Behind her, Willowbrook Asylum groaned and collapsed inward, centuries of darkness imploding into nothingness. Breathing heavily, Emily watched as the dust settled. The oppressive weight that had haunted the grounds was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. Over the following weeks, Emily dedicated herself to uncovering the truth about Willowbrook. She published articles, held press conferences, and worked with authorities to memorialize the victims. The asylum's dark legacy became a story of remembrance and justice. But late at night, when the world was quiet, she could still hear faint whispers, a gentle chorus of gratitude carried on the wind. One evening, as she reviewed her notes, she found a photograph that hadn't been there before. It was a picture of the young girl with the sewn mouth, now smiling softly, the stitches gone. Written on the back were the words, "Thank you for setting us free." Emily smiled, tears welling in her eyes. Yet, as she turned off the lights and prepared for bed, a shadow flickered in the corner of her room. A familiar chill settled in the air. From the darkness, the voice of the doctor whispered, "This isn't over." Her blood ran cold. Some evils, she realized, are not so easily destroyed. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Thomas was a travel photographer, always seeking the next captivating shot. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he found himself driving along an unfamiliar country road. His GPS had lost signal miles back, and the dense forest on either side of the narrow path seemed to close in with each passing mile. Just as he considered turning back, he spotted a sign partially obscured by overgrown vines. "Welcome to Hollow Creek." Relieved at the prospect of finding directions and perhaps a place to rest, he continued into the town. Hollow Creek was eerily quiet. The quaint houses and storefronts lined the main street, but there was no sign of people, no pedestrians, no moving cars, not even the distant bark of a dog. The air was thick with fog, and an unsettling stillness hung over the place. Thomas parked his car near a small diner. The neon sign buzzed faintly, flickering in and out. He stepped out and called, "Hello? Anyone here?" His voice echoed down the empty street. He pushed open the diner's door, a bell chiming softly above. Inside, the tables were set as if expecting patrons, glasses sparkling and menus neatly placed. A fresh pot of coffee steamed behind the counter. "Hello," he called again. Silence. He poured himself a cup of coffee, hoping someone would emerge. As he sipped, he noticed a newspaper on the counter. The date caught his eye. It was from exactly 50 years ago. The headline read, "Mysterious disappearances plague Hollow Creek." A chill ran down his spine. He set the cup down and decided to leave. Back on the street, the fog had thickened, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally. He headed toward his car, but stopped when he saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. "Excuse me," Thomas shouted. "Can you help me?" The figure didn't move. As Thomas approached, he realized it was a statue, a remarkably lifelike one of a man pointing down the street. Confusion turned to alarm when he noticed more statues appearing on the sidewalks. Women, children, all frozen in various poses of daily life. Heart pounding, he hurried back to his car. The doors were all locked, and the keys were missing. Frantically checking his pockets, he tried to recall if he'd taken them with him. A child's laughter echoed through the fog. "Who's there?" he demanded, fear creeping into his voice. No response. He decided to find another way out. Perhaps there was a hotel or a police station. He walked briskly down the street, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the dense mist. The buildings loomed overhead, their windows dark and empty. Turning a corner, he nearly collided with another statue, this one of a young girl holding a balloon. Except the balloon moved subtly, swaying as if caught in a gentle breeze. "This can't be happening," he whispered. The laughter sounded again, closer this time. He broke into a run, not caring where he was headed as long as it was away from the unnerving sculptures and disembodied sounds. He stumbled upon a grandiose building, the town hall. The doors were ajar, and warm light spilled out. Rushing inside, he found a large hall lined with mirrors. At the far end stood a massive clock, its hands ticking backward. "Welcome, traveler," a voice whispered. Thomas spun around but saw no one. "Who's there?" "We've been waiting for you," the voice replied, echoing from all directions. The mirrors began to fog, and faint images appeared. Scenes of people going about their lives in Hollow Creek, but their eyes were hollow, and their movements jerky, unnatural. "Join us," the voices chorused. Panicking, Thomas backed away, only to feel a cold hand grip his shoulder. He turned to see one of the statue-like figures staring directly at him, its eyes now alive and filled with sorrow. "Set us free," it pleaded. He wrenched away and dashed deeper into the building, finding himself in a corridor lined with old photographs. In each one, the same townspeople appeared, their faces growing more distorted with each passing frame. He realized with dawning horror that they were the same figures as the statues outside. A door at the end of the hallway swung open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. With nowhere else to go, he descended. In the basement, candles flickered, casting long shadows on the stone walls. An ancient book rested on a pedestal in the center of the room. Compelled by a force he couldn't explain, Thomas approached it. The pages turned on their own, stopping at an illustration of the town, surrounded by shadowy figures. An inscription read, "To escape the curse, a soul must take our place." The room grew colder. Behind him, the townspeople gathered, their hollow eyes watching expectantly. "You can free us," the voice from before whispered. "All you have to do is read the words." Thomas shook his head. "I don't understand." A woman stepped forward, the same one from the statues and photographs. "We've been trapped here for so long, bound by a curse. Only a living soul can release us." He looked back at the book. The text seemed to shift, the letters rearranging themselves into a language he could comprehend. "Please," the woman begged. "We cannot move on until someone takes our place." Realization dawned. "You want me to stay here? Forever?" "It's the only way," she said softly. He backed away. "No, there has to be another way." They advanced slowly. "Join us," they whispered. "It's not so bad. Time stands still here. You'll never age, never suffer." Desperate to escape, Thomas grabbed a candle and swung it at the figures. They recoiled but didn't retreat. He spotted another staircase leading up and bolted for it, the townspeople close behind. Bursting through a door, he found himself outside the town hall. The fog had lifted slightly, and dawn was breaking. He ran toward the outskirts of town, the borders seeming to stretch endlessly. No matter which street he took, he ended up back at the central square. Exhausted and defeated, he collapsed to his knees. The townspeople surrounded him, their faces expressionless. The woman knelt beside him. "It will be over soon." With his last bit of strength, Thomas remembered his camera. He pulled it out and snapped a photo of the rising sun. A blinding flash erupted, and the townspeople shrieked. shadows peeling away from them. The sky brightened, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. When he opened his eyes, he was alone in an overgrown field. The town was gone. Confused but relieved, he made his way back to the main road, where his car was parked safely by the side. The keys were in the ignition. He drove until he reached a gas station. Inside, he recounted his experience to the attendant. "You say you were in Hollow Creek?" the man asked, eyes widening. "Yes, but it's not on any map. I don't understand what happened." The attendant shook his head. Hollow Creek was abandoned decades ago after a terrible plague. Folks around here say the town appears to those who are lost, both on the road and in life. Thomas considered this. I don't know what to believe. Back at home, he reviewed the photos on his camera. Most were overexposed or blurry, except for one, the photo he took at the end. It showed the town square bathed in sunlight, and among the buildings stood the townspeople, smiling genuinely. But in the corner of the photo, he noticed something else. His own face reflected, eyes hollow, a subtle smile on his lips. A chill settled over him. From that day on, Thomas was different. Friends noticed he was quieter, his gaze distant. He no longer sought adventure or captured moments. Instead, he spent hours staring at that final photograph. One morning he was gone. No note, no signs of struggle, just vanished. Weeks later, travelers reported sightings of a quiet town that wasn't on any map. In the town square stood a new statue, a man holding a camera, eyes carved with a hint of sorrow. They say if you find yourself lost on an unfamiliar road and stumble upon Hollow Creek, you might just see him, waiting eternally, hoping someone will finally set him free. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe, and like the video, let's begin the next story. Evelyn had always been a city girl, but after inheriting her grandmother's farmhouse in the quiet town of Meadowbrook, she saw it as a chance to start anew. The house sat amid rolling fields of tall corn, their golden stalks swaying gently in the breeze. It was picturesque, a stark contrast to the concrete jungle she left behind. The townsfolk were friendly but reserved. They spoke in hushed tones and offered polite smiles, but there was a lingering apprehension in their eyes. Dismissing it as small-town peculiarities, Evelyn settled into her new home. While unpacking, she discovered an old journal tucked away in a dusty attic trunk. The pages were yellowed and filled with her grandmother's neat handwriting. One passage caught her attention. The harvest approaches, and with it, the whispers in the fields grow louder. We must heed the old ways to keep them at bay. Curious, Evelyn asked Mr. Thompson, the elderly neighbor, about the harvest. He hesitated before replying. "Just old superstitions, my dear. Nothing to concern yourself with." Unsatisfied, she pressed on. "What old ways?" He sighed deeply. "It's best you focus on settling in. The corn grows tall, and sometimes the wind plays tricks." That night, as Evelyn lay in bed, she heard it, a soft rustling outside her window. Assuming it was the wind, she tried to ignore it, but the sound persisted, almost rhythmic. She got up and peered through the curtains. Under the moonlight, the cornfields looked like an endless sea. Just as she was about to turn away, a figure emerged from the rows, a tall silhouette standing motionless among the stalks. "Hello," she called out nervously. The figure didn't respond. Feeling uneasy, she closed the curtains tightly and returned to bed, sleep eluding her. The next morning, she ventured into town to gather supplies. At the general store, she overheard whispers between the locals. "Did you hear? Another scarecrow was found torn apart," one woman murmured. "They say it's a bad omen," replied another. When Evelyn approached, the conversation ceased abruptly. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Just stories to scare children," the storekeeper said quickly. "Pay them no mind." As she left, a young girl tugged at her sleeve. "They come when the corn is high," she whispered. "You should leave before the harvest moon." Chilled by the warning, Evelyn returned home. Determined to understand what was happening, she delved back into her grandmother's journal. "We place the scarecrows as guardians, offerings to the ones who dwell between the rows. Without them, we are vulnerable." That evening, Evelyn decided to inspect the fields. As the sun set, casting an orange glow, she walked along the edge of the corn. The rustling seemed to follow her, though there was no breeze. Deep within the rows, she spotted a scarecrow, its straw-stuffed body propped on a wooden pole, burlap sack for a head, and button eyes that seemed to watch her. A sudden sense of dread washed over her. She turned to leave but found the path behind her obscured. Panic set in as she realized she was no longer at the edge but deep within the maze of corn. Stay calm, she told herself. Just retrace your steps. As she moved, the rustling grew louder, accompanied by faint whispers that sent shivers down her spine. Shadows danced in her peripheral vision. "Who's there?" she shouted. The whispers turned to eerie laughter. Heart pounding, she broke into a run, pushing through the stalks, leaves slicing against her skin. The rows seemed endless, shifting unnaturally, guiding her deeper. She stumbled into a clearing where several scarecrows stood in a circle. But these were different. Their heads were adorned with animal skulls, and symbols were carved into their wooden frames. In the center lay a torn piece of fabric from her own shirt. Fear consumed her. "This isn't possible." A voice, hollow and ancient, echoed around her. "You trespass where you do not belong. Show yourself," she demanded, trying to sound brave. From behind the scarecrows, figures emerged, tall and slender, their forms obscured by tattered cloaks made of corn husks. Their faces were hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats, shadows concealing any features. Evelyn backed away. "I didn't mean any harm. I just want to go home. There is a debt to be paid," they intoned in unison. "The harvest must be fulfilled." She turned to flee, but found herself surrounded. The air grew cold, and the sky above darkened unnaturally. Desperate, she remembered the journal's mention of offerings. "Wait, I can't. I can make an offering." They paused. "Please," she pleaded, "tell me what you want." One stepped forward, extending a skeletal hand. "A life for the land, as it has always been." She shook her head. "I can't. I won't. Then the field shall claim what is owed." The ground beneath her began to soften, her feet sinking into the soil. She struggled, but the more she fought, the deeper she sank. "Help!" she screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the rustling corn. Just as the soil reached her knees, a beam of light pierced the darkness. Mr. Thompson burst into the clearing, holding a lantern and chanting in a language Evelyn didn't recognize. The figures recoiled, the hold on her loosening. "You interfere, old one," they hissed. "She is under my protection," he declared. With a final chant, the figures dissipated into the shadows, and the cornfield fell silent. Mr. Thompson helped her out of the soil. "Come quickly," he urged. Back at the farmhouse, he explained. "The guardians of the fields demand a sacrifice each harvest moon. It's a pact our ancestors made to ensure bountiful crops." "Why didn't anyone warn me?" she cried. "We hoped the old ways had been forgotten, that the pact would fade without renewal. But your presence stirred them." Evelyn's eyes widened. "My grandmother." She knew. He nodded solemnly. "She upheld the pact for years. With her gone, they sought the next of kin." She felt a mix of fear and betrayal. "What can I do?" "Leave this place. Never return. It's the only way to break the cycle." At dawn, Evelyn packed her belongings. As she drove away, the fields seemed peaceful, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes watching her departure. Years later, she received a letter informing her that the farmhouse had burned down under mysterious circumstances. No other property was damaged, and no cause was determined. Evelyn knew the guardians had claimed what they believed was theirs. Though she tried to forget, every year on the harvest moon, she'd dream of the whispering fields and the silent figures waiting among the corn. And somewhere in Meadowbrook, the corn still grows unnaturally tall, swaying to the rhythm of ancient whispers, awaiting the return of the one who got away. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Jacob was an avid traveler, always seeking out the unbeaten paths and hidden gems that the world had to offer. One evening, while exploring a remote village nestled deep within the mountains, he stumbled upon an old, unattended train station. The structure was worn, with ivy crawling up its cracked walls, but a dim light flickered within. Curiosity piqued, Jacob ventured inside. An antiquated ticket booth stood at the far end, behind which sat a gaunt, elderly man. His eyes were clouded, yet they seemed to pierce right through Jacob. "Evening," Jacob greeted. "Is there a train coming through here?" The old man nodded slowly. "The midnight train arrives soon. Where does it go?" "Depends," the man replied cryptically. "One ticket?" Jacob hesitated, but then thought of the adventure. "Sure, why not?" The old man handed him a tarnished ticket. "Safe travels," he murmured. As Jacob waited on the deserted platform, a dense fog rolled in, enveloping the station. The distant sound of a whistle cut through the silence, and soon, an imposing black train emerged from the mist, its wheels screeching as it halted before him. He boarded cautiously, finding the interior surprisingly luxurious, yet devoid of passengers. The carriage was adorned with crimson velvet seats and ornate golden fixtures. Soft, melancholic music played from an unseen source. Choosing a seat by the window, Jacob watched as the train began to move, the landscape outside blurring into darkness. Minutes passed, and he realized the scenery never changed, just an endless void outside. A steward dressed in an old-fashioned uniform appeared. "May I offer you a refreshment?" he asked. "Just some water, please," Jacob replied. The steward's face remained expressionless. "I'm afraid we don't have that." "Coffee, then?" The steward shook his head slowly. "We have only what was left behind." Before Jacob could inquire further, the steward vanished down the aisle. Time seemed to stretch. His watch had stopped, and his phone had no signal. Growing uneasy, Jacob decided to explore the train. He moved through several carriages, each identical and equally empty. In one carriage, he noticed a woman sitting alone, staring blankly ahead. Relieved to see someone else, he approached her. "Excuse me," he began. "Do you know where this train is headed?" She turned to face him, her eyes hollow and distant. "Back," she whispered. "Back where?" "To where it ended." A chill ran down his spine. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." She offered a sad smile. "Neither did I." Feeling unnerved, Jacob continued moving through the carriages. The further he went, the more the train's condition deteriorated. The lavish interiors gave way to rusted walls and flickering lights. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, and whispers echoed around him. He opened a door to the next carriage and found it filled with passengers. But something was off. Their faces were blurred, features indistinct. They sat stiffly, murmuring in low tones. "Hello," Jacob called out. All heads turned toward him in unison, conversations halting abruptly. "Is everything all right?" he asked nervously. They stared silently. Then, as one, they raised their hands and pointed behind him. Jacob spun around to see the steward glaring at him, eyes now black as coal. "You shouldn't be here," the steward hissed. Panic surged. "I want to get off this train," Jacob demanded. The steward's lips curled into a sinister grin. "I'm afraid that's impossible. The journey must be completed." Jacob bolted back the way he came, but the corridors seemed endless. Doors that once led to previous carriages now opened into dark voids or bricked walls. The train's interior warped and twisted, reality bending around him. He burst into a carriage that resembled his childhood home. Confused, he saw his old toys scattered on the floor and family photos adorning the walls. In the center stood a figure with its back turned. "Mom," he whispered. The figure turned, a faceless entity wearing his mother's dress. It reached out with elongated fingers. "Stay with us," it gurgled. Jacob recoiled, stumbling backward. He fled, heart pounding, as the train around him groaned like a living creature. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices overlapping. "Join us, lost souls. No escape." Desperate, he shouted, "This isn't real." Suddenly, he found himself in a dimly lit carriage where the old man from the ticket booth sat alone. "What's happening?" Jacob demanded. The old man looked up, his eyes now clear and piercing. "You're on the midnight train," he said softly. "A passage for those between worlds." "Between worlds? I don't understand." "You met with an accident," the old man explained. "Do you remember?" Jacob's mind raced. Flashes of memory surfaced. A slick road, headlights blinding him, the screech of tires, then darkness. "No," he murmured, shaking his head. "That can't be." "I'm sorry," the old man said. "This train brings souls to their final destination. Acceptance will bring you peace. Jacob sank into a seat, disbelief washing over him. But I feel alive. The memories of life linger, the old man replied. But you must let go. Tears welled in Jacob's eyes. What happens if I don't? The train groaned, and shadows crept closer. Eternity on the tracks, the old man warned. Lost between realms, haunted by what was and what could have been. Taking a deep breath, Jacob asked, "How do I move on?" The old man stood, extending a hand. By accepting the journey's end. Jacob hesitated before grasping it. The train began to slow, and a warm light filled the carriage, dispelling the shadows. "Where will this take me?" he asked. "That is for you to decide," the old man said with a gentle smile. As the train came to a halt, the doors opened to reveal a serene landscape bathed in golden light. Figures stood in the distance, loved ones who had passed before. Jacob turned to thank the old man, but he was gone. Gathering his courage, he stepped off the train. A profound peace enveloped him as he walked toward the familiar faces, the weight of his past life lifting with each step. Behind him, the train's doors closed silently. It faded into the mist, continuing its eternal journey to collect the souls of those lost between worlds. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Lily had always been fascinated by antiques. The thrill of uncovering items with rich histories was unmatched. One crisp autumn afternoon, she stumbled upon an old curiosity shop she'd never noticed before, nestled between two modern storefronts. The shop was dimly lit, filled with trinkets and relics from bygone eras. As she browsed, a large, ornate mirror caught her eye. Its frame was intricately carved with swirling patterns and symbols she didn't recognize. The glass was oddly pristine, reflecting her image with unsettling clarity. "Ah, you have a keen eye," the shopkeeper said, appearing beside her. He was an elderly man with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "It's beautiful," Lily whispered, unable to look away from her reflection. "It's said to be a portal," he continued softly. "A window to another world." She chuckled nervously. "Does it come with a story?" "Every item here does," he replied cryptically. "But some stories are still being written." Compelled by an inexplicable urge, Lily purchased the mirror and took it home. She hung it in her bedroom, the centerpiece of the room. That night, as she prepared for bed, she stood before the mirror, studying her reflection. But something was off. For a split second, her reflection seemed to smirk while her own face remained neutral. She blinked, and the image corrected itself. "Just tired," she told herself, climbing into bed. In the middle of the night, a faint whisper stirred her from sleep. "Lily." The voice was distant, echoing. She sat up, heart pounding. The room was cloaked in darkness, save for a sliver of moonlight that glinted off the mirror. Mustering her courage, she approached the mirror. As she drew nearer, the surface began to ripple like water. Her reflection reached out, lips curling into a sinister smile. "Won't you come join me?" the reflection whispered. Lily stumbled back, fear gripping her. "This isn't real," she murmured. The reflection stepped forward, emerging from the glass. It was her, but the eyes were darker, the smile twisted. "I've been waiting so long to be free," the doppelganger said. Lily turned to run, but the bedroom door slammed shut. She was trapped. "What do you want?" she cried. "Your place," the reflection hissed. "It's so cold on the other side." The doppelganger lunged, and Lily felt a cold hand grasp her wrist, pulling her toward the mirror. She struggled, but the grip was ironclad. "Let me go," she screamed. With a final, desperate pull, the reflection yanked her into the mirror. Lily tumbled through a void, darkness swallowing her screams. She awoke on the floor of a room that looked like hers, but was suffocatingly cold and devoid of color. The world beyond the mirror was bleak, shadows stretching infinitely. From the other side, she heard her own voice. "Thank you," the doppelganger said, now outside the mirror, living in her world. Lily pounded on the glass. "No, please let me out." The new Lily merely smiled and turned away, leaving the original trapped in the mirror's depths. Days turned into weeks. Lily watched helplessly as the doppelganger lived her life. mimicking her perfectly. No one noticed the change. Not her friends, not her family. One night, as the doppelganger stood before the mirror, Lily pleaded, "Why are you doing this?" Her reflection looked back, eyes devoid of empathy. "Because I want to live," it replied, "and you took that for granted." Despair turned to anger. "I won't let you get away with this." The doppelganger laughed softly. "And how will you stop me? You're just a shadow now." Determined, Lily began exploring the mirror world. She discovered faint whispers and fleeting shapes, others who had been trapped before her. They taught her how to manipulate the reflections, to influence small things. The next day, as the doppelganger applied lipstick, Lily concentrated all her energy. The lipstick snapped, smearing across the imposter's face. Frowning, the doppelganger muttered, defiant till the end. Over weeks, Lily's powers grew. She caused lights to flicker, objects to move. The doppelganger grew paranoid, dark circles forming under her eyes. "You're ruining everything," the imposter screamed at the mirror. Lily appeared in the reflection, a newfound confidence emanating from her. "Let me out, and I'll stop." "Never. Then we'll both suffer." The doppelganger's life began to unravel. Friends avoided her, sensing something was off. Work became impossible as accidents plagued her. Desperate, she returned to the shop where the mirror was purchased, but found it abandoned, as if it had been deserted for years. "Please," she begged the empty store. "I need help." A voice echoed. "You wanted life, but you don't know how to live it." The doppelganger smashed a fist against the dusty counter. "I won't go back." Meanwhile, Lily continued her assault from the mirror world. She realized that by weakening the doppelganger, she might reclaim her place. One night, as the imposter stood before the mirror, tears streaming down her face, Lily reached out. "We can end this." "How?" the doppelganger whispered. "Let me return. You don't belong there." Defeated, the reflection nodded. "Maybe we can share." Before Lily could react, the doppelganger pressed a hand against the glass, passing through. Their hands met, and a blinding light filled the room. When it faded, Lily found herself back in her bedroom, warmth returning to her. The mirror stood intact, the surface still. Relieved, she thought it was over. But in the mirror, her reflection smirked. "Thank you for the lesson," it said. Her heart sank. "What do you mean?" "Now I know how to cross over whenever I please." The reflection vanished, leaving only darkness. From that day on, Lily never felt alone. In every mirror, she sensed eyes watching her, waiting for the right moment to return. Sleep evaded her, paranoia consuming every waking moment. The boundary between her world and the mirrors had been fractured, and there was no way to mend it. One morning, she awoke to find herself back in the cold, colorless world within the mirror. Her screams echoed into the abyss as her reflection lived freely in her place, the cycle destined to repeat endlessly. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Daniel was a marine biologist with a fascination for the mysteries of the deep ocean. When he received an invitation to join an exclusive expedition to explore an uncharted trench in the Pacific, he couldn't resist. The mission was funded by a private corporation with cutting-edge technology, promising discoveries beyond imagination. The vessel, the Odyssey, was state-of-the-art, equipped with advanced submersibles capable of withstanding the immense pressures of the deep sea. The crew was a small team of experts, each specialized in various fields. Among them was Dr. Helena Reyes, a geologist with whom Daniel had a friendly rivalry. As they set sail, Daniel felt a mix of excitement and unease. The ocean was calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension among the crew. Whispers circulated about the true purpose of the expedition, but no one seemed to have clear answers. On the third day, they reached the coordinates of the trench. The water below was a dark, impenetrable blue. Sonar readings indicated depths far exceeding any known trenches. "This can't be right," Helena murmured, studying the data. "It's like a void." The expedition leader, Captain Mitchell, dismissed their concerns. "We're here to explore the unknown. Prepare the submersibles." Daniel and Helena were assigned to Deep Quest, the primary exploration sub. As they descended, the sunlight faded and the temperature dropped. The only sounds were the hum of the engines and their own breathing. Approaching 10,000 meters, Helena reported. All systems stable. Suddenly, the sonar picked up a massive structure below. Is that a cavern? Daniel asked, incredulous. The formation resembled an archway, impossibly large and ornate, with carvings that looked disturbingly unnatural. Are those symbols? Helena leaned closer to the monitor. As they neared the structure, the sub's lights flickered. Instruments malfunctioned, and the controls became sluggish. What's going on? Daniel tapped the gauges. A low-frequency hum resonated through the sub, growing louder. It wasn't mechanical. It felt alive. Surface, we're experiencing technical difficulties, Helena radioed. No response. The sub lurched violently, throwing them against their harnesses. The lights went out, and for a moment, they were enveloped in total darkness. Switching to auxiliary power, Daniel said, flipping switches. The emergency lights cast a dim red glow. Look, Helena pointed outside. Bioluminescent creatures swarmed around them, unlike anything they'd ever seen. Their bodies were translucent, with tendrils that stretched and contracted rhythmically. Are they attacking us? Daniel wondered. The creatures pressed against the viewport, their forms pulsing. Then, as quickly as they appeared, they dispersed. The subsystems rebooted, and the monitors displayed data scrolling rapidly in an unknown language. That's not possible, Helena whispered. A voice crackled over the radio, distorted and eerie. Turn back. Did you hear that? Daniel asked. Before she could respond, the sub began descending on its own. Controls were unresponsive. We're being pulled in, Helena's voice trembled. The sub passed through the archway into a vast underwater cavern. Inside was a colossal structure resembling a temple, covered in the same unsettling symbols. The hum returned, now a chorus of whispers invading their minds. Images flashed before Daniel's eyes. A civilization long lost, rituals performed in darkness, an abyss that hungered. We need to get out of here, he shouted. Agreed. Helena frantically tried the controls. Manual override engaged. The sub responded sluggishly, but they managed to steer it away from the temple. As they ascended, the whispers intensified. Stay with us, they beckoned. Knowledge eternal. Daniel felt a sharp pain in his head, voices clawing at his sanity. Helena, something's wrong. She clutched her temples. I feel it too. Keep going. Breaking free from the cavern, they continued upward. The subsystem stabilized, and the ocean around them returned to its dark serenity. We're almost there, Helena sighed with relief. Suddenly, a massive shadow eclipsed them. A creature of unimaginable size loomed above, its form a writhing mass of tentacles and eyes that glowed with malevolence. My God, Daniel gasped. The creature enveloped the sub, squeezing. Metal groaned as the hull began to buckle. Mayday! Mayday! This is Deep Quest. Helena screamed into the radio. We need immediate assistance. Static was the only reply. The viewport cracked, water seeping in. Daniel grabbed an emergency suit. We have to abandon the sub. At this depth, we'll be crushed. Better than being eaten by that thing. With no time to argue, they sealed their suits. The sub's hatch resisted but finally gave way. They propelled themselves into the open water, the creature momentarily distracted by the sub. Head for the surface. Daniel's voice echoed in his helmet. They ascended rapidly, but the pressure was immense. Their suits creaked, alarms blaring about decompression risks. Behind them, the creature pursued, moving with terrifying speed. We're not going to make it. Helena's voice was barely audible. Yes, we will, Daniel urged, though doubt gnawed at him. A beam of light pierced the darkness from above, the ship's searchlights. They found us, Daniel exclaimed. A harpoon shot through the water, striking the creature. It recoiled, emitting a sound that vibrated through their bones. Mechanical arms reached down, grabbing Daniel and Helena, pulling them toward the surface. On board the Odyssey, chaos ensued. Crew members rushed to assist them as they collapsed on the deck. What happened down there? Captain Mitchell demanded. No time, Daniel gasped. We have to leave. Now. The ship's instruments malfunctioned, compasses spinning wildly. The sea around them began to churn. From the depths, multiple creatures emerged, surrounding the vessel. "Full speed ahead," the captain ordered. The engines roared to life, but the ship struggled against powerful waves. One creature rose before them, its massive form blocking their path. "Brace for impact," someone shouted. The creature slammed into the ship, sending people and equipment flying. Daniel grabbed Helena as they were thrown overboard into the raging sea. Disoriented, Daniel surfaced, clinging to debris. "Helena," he called out. She emerged nearby, coughing. "Over here." The creatures circled them, but did not attack. Instead, the whispers returned clearer than before. "Return to the abyss. Become one with us. We can't let them take us." Helena's eyes were filled with determination. "Look," Daniel pointed to a lifeboat adrift. They swam toward it, muscles burning with exhaustion. Climbing aboard, they paddled away from the wreckage of the Odyssey, which was being pulled beneath the waves along with the remaining crew. "Is anyone else alive?" Daniel scanned the horizon. No response came, only silence and the ever-present whispers. "Land is our only chance," Helena said. They drifted for hours, days, it was impossible to tell. The sky remained perpetually overcast, and time lost meaning. Finally, the silhouette of an island appeared. Relief washed over them as they reached the shore. Collapsing on the sand, Daniel looked back at the ocean. "Do you think we're safe?" Helena shook her head. "I don't know." They explored the island, discovering ruins similar to the temple beneath the sea. The same symbols adorned the stone structures. "This can't be." Daniel felt dread creeping in. A sense of being watched settled over them. Shadows moved at the edge of their vision, and the whispers grew louder. "Welcome," a voice echoed from all directions. A figure emerged from the ruins, a humanoid shape with eyes as dark as the abyss. "Who are you?" Helena demanded. "We are the keepers of the deep," it replied. "You have been chosen to join us." "We don't want any part of this," Daniel asserted. "You have seen too much. The knowledge is within you now." Pain surged through their heads. Visions of ancient rituals, cosmic horrors, and worlds beyond comprehension flooded their minds. "Make it stop," Helena cried out. "Embrace it." The figure extended its hand. "And be free." Mustering his willpower, Daniel grabbed Helena's hand. "Run." They fled into the jungle, the landscape twisting around them. The trees warped, paths looping back to the ruins no matter which direction they took. "It's no use," Helena sobbed. "We're trapped." Daniel noticed a cliff overlooking the turbulent sea. "There," he pointed. "Our only chance is to jump." "Are you insane?" "Maybe, but I'd rather take my chances with the ocean than with whatever that is." With the entity closing in, they sprinted toward the cliff's edge. "Stop," the voice commanded, echoing within their very souls. They leaped, plummeting into the cold embrace of the ocean below. Darkness enveloped Daniel. When he opened his eyes, he was on a beach under a bright sky. The sun warmed his skin, and the air was filled with the sound of gentle waves. "Helena," he sat up, spotting her lying nearby. She stirred, groaning. "What happened?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think we escaped." They looked out at the sea. It was calm, normal. "Do you think it was all a hallucination?" Helena wondered. Before he could answer, a piece of debris washed ashore. It was a fragment of the Odyssey, bearing the ship's name. "It was real," Daniel affirmed. As they stood, planning their next move, a small fishing boat appeared on the horizon. They waved frantically, and the vessel altered course toward them. Rescued, they recounted their story to skeptical listeners. No one believed tales of sea monsters and ancient temples. Back on the mainland, Daniel and Helena parted ways, agreeing to never speak of the events again. Months passed, but the whispers never left them. In quiet moments, they heard the call of the abyss, felt the pull of the unknown depths. One night, Daniel stood on a pier, staring into the inky black water. The urge to dive was overwhelming. Behind him, Helena appeared. "You feel it too," she said softly. He nodded. "I don't think we ever really escaped." From the shadows, figures emerged, people with eyes as dark as the entity on the island. "It's time," they said in unison. Daniel and Helena exchanged a resigned glance. Hand in hand, they walked toward the water. As they disappeared beneath the surface, the sea remained calm, giving no hint of the secrets it held or the souls it claimed. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Alex was an ambitious journalist always on the hunt for a groundbreaking story. When rumors spread about a secluded village called Hollow's End, a place absent from maps and whispered about in hushed tones, he saw it as the perfect opportunity. Locals spoke of disappearances and strange occurrences, but no one dared to venture there. Determined, Alex packed his gear and set off, navigating through dense forests guided only by vague directions from wary townsfolk. As he neared Hollow's End, the trees grew taller and the canopy thicker, shrouding the path in perpetual twilight. At dusk, he arrived. The village was eerily quiet. Old cottages with boarded windows lined the cobblestone streets. An unsettling mist clung to the ground, swirling around his feet. Despite the silence, he felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. "Hello," Alex called out. No response. He entered what appeared to be an inn. Dust coated the surfaces, and cobwebs draped from the ceiling. On the counter lay a ledger, its pages yellowed with age. Flipping it open, he saw names dating back centuries, the last entry written 50 years ago. A sudden whisper echoed behind him. "You shouldn't be here." He spun around, but saw no one. "Who's there?" he demanded. Silence. Unease gnawed at him, but curiosity pushed him forward. He climbed the stairs, each step creaking loudly. At the end of a long hallway, a door stood ajar with a warm light spilling out. Approaching cautiously, he peeked inside. An old woman sat by a fireplace, knitting. "I've been expecting you," she said without looking up. "Me? How could you know I was coming?" Alex asked, entering the room. She glanced at him, her eyes milky with age yet piercing. "They always send one like you, a seeker. Who are you?" She smiled faintly. "Just a keeper of stories. But some tales are better left untold." Alex took out his recorder. "I'd like to hear your story." Her expression darkened. "Be careful what you seek. The shadows here are alive, and they crave more than just attention." Before he could respond, the light flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. The fire extinguished, leaving only the cold. "Hello," he called out. The old woman was gone. Fumbling with his flashlight, he switched it on. The room was empty. No furniture, no fireplace, just bare walls covered in strange symbols. Panic set in. He rushed back into the hallway, but it seemed to stretch infinitely, doors multiplying on either side. Whispers emanated from behind them, growing louder. "Join us," the voices beckoned. He ran down the stairs, but instead of the inn's lobby, he found himself in a vast chamber filled with shadows that danced without light. In the center stood a towering figure cloaked in darkness, its form shifting like smoke. "Why leave so soon?" it hissed. "What do you want?" Alex's voice trembled. It extended a shadowy limb. "A bargain. Your freedom for a story untold." He realized with dread that the village itself was a trap, a place that lured the curious and fed upon them. "I don't understand." The entity moved closer. "We are the forgotten, sustained by the memories of those who wander here. Share our tale with the world, and you may leave." He hesitated. "If I tell your story, others will come. They'll be in danger." "Precisely," it whispered. Alex grappled with his conscience. Condemn others to save himself? He couldn't. "No, I won't do it," he declared. The shadows around him writhed angrily. "Then remain here, with us, forever." The chamber began to close in, darkness pressing against him. Desperate, he searched for an escape but found none. A faint voice suddenly echoed, cutting through the darkness. "There is another way." The old woman appeared beside him, her form shimmering. "Break the cycle," she urged. "Shatter the illusion." "How?" Alex asked, clinging to hope. "Reject their reality. They have power only if you believe." Gathering his courage, he closed his eyes and steadied his breath. "This isn't real," he whispered. "You have no power over me." The shadows roared in defiance. "Fool, you cannot escape." He felt a cold grip on his arm, but he focused inward, repeating his mantra. The whispers grew distant, the darkness less oppressive. When he opened his eyes, he was standing in the middle of the empty village street. Dawn was breaking, the mist dissipating with the first light of day. Relieved, he hurried back through the forest, vowing to leave Hollow's End behind forever. Weeks later, back in the comfort of his apartment, Alex tried to move on. One night, as he was organizing his notes, he found his recorder. Curious, he played it. "We Are the Forgotten." The Shadow's voice hissed from the device. His blood ran cold. How was this possible? The lights flickered and the temperature dropped. From the corners of the room, shadows began to pool and rise. "You cannot hide," the whisper echoed. Realization struck him. By resisting the bargain, he hadn't broken the cycle but brought the darkness with him. He grabbed his notes and hurriedly scribbled down everything he could remember about Hollow's End, determined to share the story and free himself. As he typed furiously on his computer, the shadows loomed ever closer. Just as he hit send to transmit his article to the publisher, darkness engulfed him. The next morning, authorities found Alex's apartment empty, the windows sealed from the inside. His whereabouts remained a mystery. Meanwhile, his article went viral, a chilling account of a cursed village that ensnared souls. Thrill seekers and curious readers flocked to find Hollow's End. They were never seen again. And so, the shadows fed, their reach extending further with each new tale told. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Emily was an aspiring writer searching for inspiration for her first novel. When she inherited her late aunt's countryside house, she saw it as the perfect retreat to focus on her work. The house was old but charming, nestled at the edge of a dense forest and miles away from the nearest town. Upon arrival, Emily felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the rustling leaves and distant bird calls. The house creaked with age, but she found comfort in its rustic beauty. She settled in, unpacking her belongings and setting up a small writing nook by a large window overlooking the forest. The first few days were peaceful. Emily spent her mornings exploring the woods and her afternoons writing. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Occasionally, she thought she saw movement between the trees, a shadow darting out of sight when she turned her head. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily sat at her desk, struggling with writer's block. Frustrated, she gazed out the window when a flicker of light deep within the forest caught her eye. It pulsed softly, beckoning. Curiosity overcame her hesitation, and she decided to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight and a light jacket, she ventured into the woods. The trees towered above, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The forest was eerily quiet, each crunch of leaves underfoot amplified in the stillness. As she moved deeper, the light grew brighter, yet remained distant. After what felt like hours, Emily stumbled upon a small clearing she hadn't seen before. In the center stood an old stone well, and the light appeared to emanate from within it. Approaching cautiously, she peered over the edge. The well seemed impossibly deep, the light swirling like mist just beyond reach. Suddenly, a whisper echoed from the darkness below. "Help me!" Startled, Emily stepped back. "Hello? Is someone there?" she called out. Silence. She considered leaving, but felt compelled to stay. The voice had sounded desperate, pleading. Summoning her courage, she leaned over the well again. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The whisper returned, louder this time. "Please, set me free." "How? What can I do?" she asked. A cold breeze swept through the clearing, and the flashlight flickered before going out. Panic set in as darkness enveloped her. She fumbled with the flashlight, tapping it until the beam returned. The clearing was no longer empty. Surrounding the well stood several shadowy figures, their forms barely distinguishable from the night. Their eyes glowed faintly, fixed upon her. Heart racing, Emily took a step back. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The figures spoke in unison, a haunting chorus. "Join us." Without hesitation, Emily turned and ran, branches tearing at her clothes as she pushed through the dense foliage. The whispers followed, echoing her name. The forest seemed endless, the trees a labyrinth designed to trap her. Finally, she broke through the tree line, the sight of her aunt's house filling her with relief. Slamming the door behind her, she locked it and collapsed against the wood, gasping for breath. That night, sleep eluded her. Every creak of the house set her nerves on edge. She questioned whether what she experienced was real or a figment of her imagination, fueled by isolation. Determined to put the incident behind her, Emily decided to focus entirely on her writing. Days passed without event, but a lingering dread hung over her. One afternoon, while sifting through the attic for old photographs, she discovered a dusty journal belonging to her aunt. Flipping through the pages, one entry caught her attention. "They call to me from the well, their voices filled with sorrow. I fear the darkness they bring and the fate that befell those before me. The house is not safe, but leaving is not an option. They won't allow it." A chill ran down Emily's spine. Her aunt had experienced the same whispers. A sudden knock on the door startled her. Peering out the window, she saw a man standing on the porch, tall, with weathered features and piercing eyes. She opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" "Apologies for the intrusion," he said. "I'm Thomas, the caretaker of the properties around these parts. I noticed someone finally moved into the old house." "Yes, I'm Emily. Did you know my aunt?" He nodded solemnly. "She kept to herself, but we spoke on occasion. Did she ever mention anything unusual about this place?" Thomas's expression grew serious. "It's best you don't dwell on such things. The woods have a way of playing tricks on lonely minds." "Please," Emily insisted. "I think something is happening here." He hesitated before replying. "There are stories, old tales about the forest and the well. Some say it's a gateway, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. I heard voices," she confessed. "They asked for help." Thomas's eyes widened. "You must leave this place," he urged. "The more you engage with them, the stronger they become." "Who are they?" "Lost souls, trapped between this world and the next. They're drawn to the living, seeking to escape their fate." Emily shook her head. "I can't just abandon the house. Staying is dangerous." Your aunt understood that too late. Before she could ask more, Thomas turned and walked away, disappearing down the path. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "Emily, join us, free us." She covered her ears, but the voices echoed inside her mind. The house groaned as if under immense weight, and shadows moved independently of the light. Desperate, she remembered the journal and searched for any solution her aunt might have found. Near the end, an entry read, "They can be banished, but only by severing their tie to this place. The well must be destroyed." Resolute, Emily grabbed a can of gasoline from the shed and headed toward the well under the cloak of darkness. The forest seemed to resist her passage, branches clawing at her skin. Reaching the clearing, she didn't hesitate. She doused the well with gasoline, the liquid sloshing over the stones. As she struck a match, the voices screamed in rage. "Stop! You don't understand." She threw the match, and flames erupted, casting the clearing in a fiery glow. The figures emerged, writhing and shrieking as the fire consumed the well. The ground trembled, and a deafening roar filled the air. A burst of energy knocked Emily backward, and everything went black. When she awoke, dawn was breaking. The well was nothing more than a smoldering ruin, and the oppressive weight had lifted from the air. Exhausted but relieved, she returned to the house. Packing her belongings, she decided it was time to leave. As she drove away, she glanced back one last time. From the edge of the forest, Thomas watched her go, a faint smile on his lips. But as she turned onto the main road, his form flickered and dissolved into mist. Miles away, Emily felt a sudden pang of unease. The radio crackled, and a familiar whisper echoed through the car. "Thank you for setting us free." Her blood ran cold. The rearview mirror reflected the empty back seat, but the shadows seemed deeper. She realized with dawning horror that in destroying the well, she hadn't banished the spirits. They were free to roam, and they had attached themselves to her. The road ahead stretched into uncertainty, and Emily knew she could never truly escape the haunting echoes she had unleashed. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe And like the video, let's begin the next story. Sophie was a collector of antique music boxes, always searching for unique pieces to add to her collection. One afternoon, while wandering through a quaint little town during her travels, she stumbled upon an old curio shop she'd never noticed before. Drawn inside by an inexplicable urge, she began to browse the dusty shelves filled with forgotten treasures. At the back of the shop, hidden beneath a pile of old books, she found it. A beautifully crafted music box made of dark wood, adorned with intricate carvings of swirling patterns and strange symbols. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. When she lifted the lid, the music that played was haunting, yet mesmerizing, a melody that seemed to echo from a distant past. "How much for this?" Sophie asked the shopkeeper. The old man behind the counter looked up, his eyes reflecting a hint of concern. "That one is not for sale," he replied. "Please," Sophie insisted. "It's exquisite, and it would mean so much to me." The shopkeeper hesitated before finally nodding. "Very well, but you must promise never to play it after midnight." Sophie laughed lightly. "Is that some kind of superstition?" "Just a precaution," the old man said quietly. "Some melodies are not meant for the late hours." Agreeing to his odd request, Sophie purchased the music box and took it home. That evening, unable to resist, she opened it and let the mysterious tune fill her apartment. The music was soothing, and she soon fell asleep on the couch. At the stroke of midnight, she awoke to the sound of the music box playing on its own. The melody was different this time, darker, more unsettling. Confused, she closed the lid, but the music continued. She tried winding it down, but the mechanism wouldn't stop. As the haunting notes filled the room, shadows began to stretch along the walls, and whispers echoed softly around her. "Who's there?" Sophie called out, fear creeping into her voice. The whispers grew louder, forming words she couldn't quite understand. The air turned cold, and a sense of dread enveloped her. Frantically, she tried to silence the music box, but it seemed to have a life of its own. The carvings on its surface began to shift, the swirling patterns twisting into faces contorted with anguish. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the corner of the room, a pale woman in a tattered dress, her eyes hollow and her expression sorrowful. "What do you want?" Sophie whispered, backing away. The woman's voice was barely audible over the music. "You have awakened us," she said. "We are bound to the melody." "I don't understand," Sophie stammered. "I didn't mean to." "The box was sealed to keep us at rest," the apparition continued. "Now, we cannot return without a new guardian. How can I help?" Sophie asked, desperate to end the nightmare. The woman extended a ghostly hand. "Take our place." Sophie shook her head, panic rising. "No, there must be another way." The whispers intensified, and more figures emerged from the shadows, their faces etched with despair. They began to close in, reaching out with translucent hands. In a final act of desperation, Sophie grabbed the music box and hurled it to the floor. It shattered into pieces, and the music ceased abruptly. The apparitions paused, their forms flickering. "You cannot break the curse so easily," the woman warned. Suddenly, the room was engulfed in darkness. When the lights flickered back on, Sophie found herself alone. The shattered pieces of the music box were gone, as if they had never existed. Relieved, she thought it was over. But over the next few days, the melody haunted her mind, playing softly at the edge of her hearing no matter where she went. Sleep eluded her, and shadows seemed to move just beyond her vision. Determined to find answers, Sophie returned to the curio shop, only to find it abandoned. Inside, dust covered empty shelves, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. On the counter lay a single item, the music box, perfectly intact. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. A note was attached, "The melody chooses its keeper." Realizing there was no escape, Sophie accepted her fate. That night, she sat alone in her apartment, the music box open before her. As the clock struck midnight, the haunting melody began to play. The apparitions appeared once more, but this time, she did not resist. "Take me," she whispered. The spirit surrounded her, and a sense of calm washed over Sophie. The next morning, she was gone. All that remained was the music box, waiting for its next owner. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. Amelia was an art student with a keen eye for beauty and a fascination with the macabre. One day, while exploring a forgotten alley of antique shops, she stumbled upon a dimly lit store she'd never noticed before. Drawn by an inexplicable urge, she ventured inside. The shop was cluttered with relics from bygone eras, dusty books, tarnished jewelry, and peculiar artifacts. But what caught Amelia's attention was a large, ornate portrait leaning against the back wall. The painting depicted a young woman dressed in Victorian attire, her eyes hauntingly lifelike and filled with a sorrow that seemed to transcend time. "Ah, you found a true masterpiece," murmured the shopkeeper, an elderly man with piercing gray eyes. "The portrait of Lady Isabella. They say it was painted by an artist who poured his very soul into his work." Amelia felt a strange connection to the portrait. "How much for it?" she asked. The shopkeeper hesitated. "It's not for the faint of heart, my dear. Rumor has it the painting is haunted." Amelia smiled. "I don't believe in such things. I'll take it." That evening, she hung the portrait in her apartment, admiring the intricate details. As night fell, she began working on her own sketches, the image of Lady Isabella inspiring her. Hours passed, and as the clock struck midnight, a soft whisper echoed through the room. "Help me." Amelia froze, her pencil hovering above the paper. She glanced around, but saw nothing amiss. "Must be my imagination," she muttered. Returning to her work, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The whisper came again, more urgent this time. "Please, set me free." Amelia's gaze drifted to the portrait. The eyes of Lady Isabella seemed to glisten, a single tear painted on her cheek that she hadn't noticed before. Did that change?" Amelia whispered. She approached the painting, examining it closely. The sorrow in the woman's eyes was more intense, almost pleading. "Amelia," the voice sighed. She stumbled back, heart pounding. "Who's there?" Silence. Determined to prove it was all in her head, she went to bed, leaving a dim light on. But sleep did not come easily. Her dreams were filled with shadows and distant cries for help. The next morning, dark circles hung under her eyes. She decided to investigate the painting's origins. At the local library, she unearthed the tragic tale of Lady Isabella Sinclair, a young woman who had vanished without a trace in the late 1800s. Rumors spoke of a forbidden love, a jealous suitor, and a painter obsessed with capturing her beauty. Amelia returned home, her mind swirling with possibilities. That night, the whispers became more frequent, more desperate. "He's trapped me. Find the key." "Who trapped you?" Amelia asked aloud, but only silence answered. She examined the portrait again and noticed something new. A tiny, ornate key painted into the background, barely visible among the shadows. Determined, she searched the frame and found a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, antique key that matched the one in the painting. Her heart raced. "What do I do with this?" The whispers guided her. "The mirror." Unlock the mirror. In her bedroom stood an old full-length mirror, a family heirloom passed down from her grandmother. She approached it, the key trembling in her hand. Upon closer inspection, she discovered a barely perceptible keyhole along the ornate frame. Taking a deep breath, she inserted the key and turned it. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and a cold breeze swept through the room. A figure emerged from the mirror. Lady Isabella herself, ethereal and radiant, yet tinged with melancholy. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like a gentle breeze. "You have set me free." Amelia stood in awe. "What happened to you?" "Trapped by a wicked artist who sought to possess my soul," Isabella replied. "He bound me to the portrait to keep me with him for eternity." Before Amelia could respond, a sinister laugh echoed through the apartment. The shadows deepened, and a cold chill settled in. "You cannot escape me, Isabella," a voice snarled. From the darkness, a gaunt figure emerged, the ghostly visage of the artist, eyes gleaming with madness. Amelia stepped between them. "Leave her alone," he sneered. "Another meddling mortal. No matter. I'll simply add you both to my collection." The room began to warp, the walls dripping like wet paint. Amelia's surroundings melted into a swirl of colors and darkness. She felt herself being pulled toward the portrait, its surface now a vortex. "Hold on to me," Isabella cried, grabbing Amelia's hand. They struggled against the pull, but the force was too strong. Just as they were about to be swallowed, Amelia remembered the key. With her free hand, she raised it high. "By this key, I banish you," she shouted. A blinding light erupted from the key, and the artist screamed as he was consumed by it. The vortex vanished, the room returning to normal. Isabella smiled gratefully. "It's over." Amelia sighed with relief. "What happens now?" "I can finally rest," Isabella said softly. "Thank you for your courage." As dawn broke, Isabella's form shimmered and began to fade. "Wait," Amelia called. "Will I see you again?" "In another time," Isabella whispered, her voice fading like a distant melody. "Live your life fully, as I could not." The mirror returned to normal, the key crumbling to dust in Amelia's hand. The portrait now depicted only an empty chair where Lady Isabella once sat. Exhausted yet at peace, Amelia knew she had experienced something beyond explanation. She decided to honor Isabella's memory by painting her story, sharing it with the world through her art. From that day forward, Amelia's paintings captured a depth of emotion that touched all who saw them. And though she never heard the whispers again, she felt a guiding presence in her life, a silent muse watching over her. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video.